And this is the second day of our symposium on representation and reality, humans, other living beings, and intelligent machines, new trends. And it's a continuation of other interesting past events on the topic. So I'm really happy for the successful first day, I must say, and but also today we have very interesting contribution. So I'm glad to give the word to Professor Lorenzo Magnani from the University of Pavia, if he wants to share slides with us.
Okay. You see, I will address a very simple problem, first of all, and also a special problem. You see that the title is a bit complicated because it is creativity, eco-cognitive openness, human and machine inferential capacity, and the subtitle is deep learning and locked strategies. So first of all, I have to explain to you that creativity refers, in my words, to the so-called creative abduction. That is, all the reasoning to hypotheses that are abductive and at the same time creative. Eco-cognitive openness, as I will soon explain, it is a concept that I proposed, also taking advantage of some Aristotelian considerations concerning the character of syllogism, that is of deduction, with respect to abduction, because you know, I remember to you that the concept of abduction was introduced by Aristotle. Then you see that there are other words. So everyone knows what is deep learning. In my case, I will take advantage of AlphaGo or AlphaZero. That is, as you perfectly know, a computational program that was particularly performative, also a property of Google and now, and eco-cognitive openness. That is, they deal with unlocked strategies. When they deal with unlocked strategies, especially when they are performing high-level cognitive activities. For instance, the creative ones. Of course, human beings too are dealing with locked strategies. For example, when they are playing Go or chess without the help of a computer. So the first problem that I want to explain, okay, see, unlocked cognitive strategies normally characterize knowledge enhanced abduction. In few words, unlocked cognitive strategies characterize human creative thinking. Instead, locked abductive strategies are good, of course. So I'm not aggressing locked abductive strategies, but they undermine what I call the maximization of eco-cognitive openness. I also strongly contend that, for example, in human scientific reasoning, we are dealing, but we would have to deal, we must deal with the maximization of eco-cognitive openness. So, to summarize, locking strategies affects creativity. So this, do not misunderstand me. This is not a criticism against computational system or AlphaGo deep learning. It is just to to set some differences and some needs. So what are the needs of human beings to be creative, and the needs of computational system? So I already explained to you that when you are making a very new creative hypothesis, you are making an abduction, a knowledge enhancing abduction. I remember to you that abduction also explains all those reasoning that are diagnostic. So when you make a diagnosis, you are making an abduction that's not particularly creative, but of course you perfectly know that it is not easy to make diagnosis, both for humans and for computational machines. Okay, so this is a page devoted to Aristotle, because Aristotle already had some clear idea. This is not my discovery, of course, but it is pretty obvious. And Aristotle is the inventor of deduction. A deduction, syllogismos, is a discourse, logos, in which certain things having been supposed, something different from the things supposed results of necessity, because these things are so. Because these things are so, I mean resulting through them. And by resulting through them, I mean needing no further term from outside in order for necessity to come about. As you perfectly know, this is the invention of logic, of deductive logic, of syllogisms, and Aristotle say, this is the study of reasoning that happens by necessity. And when you pass from premises to the conclusion, you do not need further term from outside. It is important to stress this problem of outside, because it is exactly the fact that Aristotle, to invent syllogism, that is deduction, creates what we can call an eco-cognitive immunization. Okay, so the deductive reasoning is working by necessity, and it is something that doesn't need anything outside. So in syllogistic theory, local environment, cognitive factor external to the inferential processes regarding users, reasoners, are given up. Accordingly, a logic gets consequence right if it is right to sets of sentences taken without reference to factor of speaker use and other pragmatic consideration. Logic is so externalized, objectified in a kind of language, currently a very complicated symbolic language, and rendered, so to speak, transcendent. Syllogism is considered as a context-free sequence of, on most accounts, three categorical propositions. Aristotle himself expressly contends that the necessity of this kind of reasoning is related to the circumstance that no further term from outside is needed. In sum, syllogism is the fruit of a kind of eco-cognitive immunization and an immunization from errors. But Aristotle, in this chapter 25, so this is a moment devoted to ancient philosophy, be patient. In this passage of chapter 25 of the prior analytics, says that when we are dealing with, look at the arrow, when we are dealing with what in English is translated what leading away, that is apagoge, abduction, we say now, that is, we are closer to scientific understanding, because when we are making abduction, we are able to make abduction because of taking something in addition, and as we previously did not have scientific understanding. So it is exactly the opposite with respect to deduction. So when you want to make an abduction, you have to take something in addition. And this is, of course, in this case, an abduction considered from the human point of view. And because of the fact Aristotle didn't have at his disposal non-standard logics, he thinks, and this is true, that abductive reasoning in humans doesn't have to be immunized from the external aspects and dimensions. So let's keep in mind these double aspects related to Aristotle, and we can speak about AlphaGo, AlphaZero, and deep learning. It is well known that Google DeepMind program AlphaGo beat Fan Hui, the European Go champion, and so this is a very well-known situation. But I say, we humans, with our organic brains, do not have to feel humiliated by this bad news, these portentous performances with the game Go and other human ways, because they are so powerful because they are involved in a kind of creativity that is particular of artificial intelligence, and especially of deep learning, that is related to the exploitment of locked strategic reasoning. So at this point you say, what is a locked strategic reasoning? So these are some pictures about the game Go that is very widespread in China and in South Korea, but also in Western world. I do not mean to downplay the importance of creative heuristics in Go and other board games and in their computational counterpart. Checkers, but also Go, are impressive examples of emerging processes where virtually infinite possibilities open up for the performance of the system from the most simple set of rules regulating the moves of its species, and they cannot be predicted from the initial status. So the strategies, or heuristics, if you want to use another name, that in this case we do not have to create distinctions, are infinite, and so they can be really very creative, new, because they are extremely variegated, but they are locked. What is the meaning of locked? It is that related to the fact that some people speak of vertical creativity and horizontal creativity, but what is the meaning of locked strategies and locked heuristics? It is extremely simple. During the game Go, in between the two players, surroundings are basically formed by board, stones, and possible artifactual assisting accessories. The strategies which are activated are multiple, but all are locked because the components of each scenario are always the same. Just the number of present stones and their configuration change in a finite and unchanging framework. No new rules, no new objects, no new boards, So this is the meaning of locked heuristic or locked strategies. These strategies lack the part which could refer to the possibility of resorting to source of information or knowledge different from the ones available in the rigid given scenario, present in strategies related to different creative cognitive activities, for example, of human, okay? So it is impossible for you when you are playing Go, both in the human and in the computational case, to change the rules, to change the number of the stones, and so on. At this point, I conclude. Locked strategies, abductive strategies, they are abductive because when you are to make a move, you have to, of course, make a hypothesis that will be the base of your action, of your move that you will adopt. I contend that to reach selective or creative good abductive results, efficient strategies have to be exploited, but it is also necessary to count on an environment characterized by what I have called optimization of eco-cognitive situatedness, in which eco-cognitive openness is fundamental. To make an example, imagine an event of discovery in the history of science. For instance, the discovery of DNA. The discovery of DNA is not based on locked strategies because Watson and Crick had to use a kind of image of a snake, of a double snake, that was something, it was an help, and it was something that arrived from the outside of the scenario, the standard scenario of the research. So, to favor good creative and selective abduction in the middle of the slide, reasoning strategies must not be locked in an external restricted eco-cognitive environment, such as in a scenario characterized by fixed definitory rules and finite material aspects, which would function as cognitive mediators able to constrain agents' reasoning. You cannot activate at your discretion a process of eco-cognitive opening in that artificial game, both in the human and in the computational case, but of course, especially in the computational case, and especially in AlphaZero, that doesn't need human data, a basis of human data. For example, in the case of scientific discovery, in which it is common to recur to disparate external models to make analogies, for example, or thought experiments and so on, the use of models. I organized 8 conferences about model reasoning, so the widespread use of models of every kind in scientific creative reasoning is completely widespread to support the abductive creative process. So this is my book of 2017, in which I explained this concept of eco-cognitive openness, that in the case of science, I say, it is not sufficient, because in the case of science, I would say we can confirm this when we see the epocality of Western science. Western science always works, always happens from the point of view of their discoveries in a situation of maximization of eco-cognitive openness. So not only optimization that is needed in other kinds of abductive reasoning, for instance, not necessarily creative, also in the case of diagnosis, in which you, of course, you have to start from a situation that has to be optimal. You need some basic knowledge and data to be able to perform an abduction. Okay, so I contend that, already said, I contend that scientific discovery is characterized by a maximization of eco-cognitive openness. Enhancing diagnosticability and discoverability is fundamental. Yes, because speaking about locked and unlocked strategies refers to the problem of different degrees of diagnosticability and discoverability, okay? If you start from poor scenarios, poor cognitive scenarios, of course, your possibility to make diagnosis or to make a discovery are jeopardized. I am convinced that they are jeopardized. So I will skip this moment of a logical depiction of abductive cognition that anyway, in summary, refers to the fact that we have to modify the environment, the eco-cognitive situatedness to make good abductive cognition in human case. And this is not the case of the computational program. And I will simply attract your attention to this fact. So, excessively dealing with locked strategies, this is compelling in the case of computational artificial intelligence program. This is not compelling in the case of human beings. But anyway, if you are, so to say, sacrificed to use locked strategies in fixed scenarios, you are in a situation that is against the maximization of cognition. This can create, and I think that from many points of view, we are already facing this situation, that we are facing with a kind of epistemic irresponsibility because we are jeopardizing some human important cognitive aspects, that is the creative ones, and especially the creativity that is typical of Western science. So I say provocatively that you know that there was a recent encyclic of the Pope, of our Pope, Catholic Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, about the importance of ecology. And there is in this encyclic a list of many ecological duties, okay? So I provocatively would add a duty, that is the urgent need of an ecology of human creativity. And an ecology of human creativity means protecting discoverability, because we have to protect the situations that favor human creative abduction, okay? So I repeat, do not misunderstand me, because I am not creating a criticism to the computational AI systems, absolutely. because they are wonderful tools, wonderful technologies based on a lot of scientific knowledge. But I am just referring to the fact that we have to consider also human cognitive activities, and protective discoverability, and of course also diagnosticability, is important, because I think, but you all, I think that you all can agree with me, that in our hyper-technological societies that are full of technological objects that are, I use in this case a philosophical term, objectification or reification of scientific knowledge, to maintain this object, it is necessary a lot of knowledge. And a lot of knowledge, not only, first of all, scientific, to control, to maintain these technological objects, but also a new and fresh ethical knowledge, because you know that technological objects that are technological tools that are built to favor human cooperation, human flourishing, can be also negative. They can aggress humans, and so in this case you need intelligent policies, so intelligent knowledge. So protecting human discoverability is an ecological problem. So to say, you know that there is a word that every day we are able to listen when we watch mass media or television programs, and it is the word sustainability. Okay, I strongly think that we have to sustain human creative reasoning. So an ecology of human creativity to save human abductive creative reasoning from some possible dangers. Protecting human creative hypothetical reasoning, okay? So you see, in this slide, there are some aspects that try to explain the kind of negative problems that human cognition is facing in this moment. Well, we can say that there are impoverished epistemological niches. You know, the settings in which scientific reasoning, scientific discovery happens are jeopardized from many points of view, because knowledge is not necessarily motion. Okay, you know that I am strongly convinced that knowledge has to be limited by the business, the commercialization, and the private sector. You know, imagine the role of patents and of marketing techno-scientific results. The role of patents inhibits the knowledge in motion, the possibility to transfer knowledge, that is the life of scientific reasoning. So there is also the typical neoliberalism assault to epistemic integrity of biopharmaceutical research. We are facing with many problems created by this situation in our era of coronavirus. And so there are also some computational invasive subcultures that jeopardize human creative abduction. In some cases, I was able to see, for instance, the owner of many deep learning programs and tools to say we do not need any more of science because we are able to make generalization. The problem is that many of the generalizations are spurious or are uninteresting. So, to conclude, I think that we can, you know that my presentation was started from Aristotle, abduction, human creative reasoning, locked and unlocked strategies, and ended with some philosophical and ethical concerns. So I think that the last slide is interesting because we have to imagine the future of eco-cognitive settings. So computationally tailored or humanly tailored. Data and types of problems that are basically privileged by current mainstream AI program are very restricted. Data preferred are quantity-related big data, and the best strategies that can be simulated are the locked ones, typical of well-established game. The case of I illustrated the case of deep learning. Maybe in the future, AI will devote more attention to more circumscribed repository of data to become closer to the typical concrete condition of human reasoning. We are not dealing with big data in our human reasoning, but we are dealing with eco-cognitive openness, okay? And at the same time, we'll be able to generate by itself new interesting information to be in turn autonomously exploited, so increasing the openness of the range of data available and living together in peace with the human need of eco-cognitive openness. However, an ethical warning has to be clearly stressed. The widespread diffusion of standard and the AI-based computational simulation will obviously incline human collectives to more and more adapt habits and settings. This is also related to the problem of habits, you know, that is an old philosophical and not only philosophical, also sociological problem, the analysis of habits and settings, situations that deal with that data and problems appropriate to those same AI tools. So this is the problem that I want to submit to your attention, because I think that we have both to protect these wonderful human achievements that are computational programs and other technologies. I wrote a book in 2007 with the title Morality in a Technological World, Knowledge as Duty, that was related to the problem of technologies. So we have to protect these wonderful human achievements, but at the same time, we have also to protect human cognition, and especially those high-level kinds of human cognition that are related to creativity and discovery. So to grant what I call good degrees of discoverability, and of course also of diagnosticability, even if to make diagnosis is extremely important, because you can diagnose not only medicine but many other situations, and you see that many politicians, scientists, and other public people are not particularly able to make good diagnosis of the current economical, political, the situation of health of human beings, and so on. So we have to protect also from that point of view. So to conclude, the problem of saving eco-cognitive openness and unlocked strategies typical of human beings. So thank you for your attention. I wanted to show 2 books of mine that are related to adaptive reasoning, okay? Charles Sanders Peirce, a great philosopher, American philosopher of the 19th century, said that adaptive reasoning characterized human beings exactly like flying characterize birds, okay? So this important way of reasoning of humans that you have seen was already clearly indicated in its eco-cognitive openness by Aristotle. And this is a handbook that I prepared on model-based science. I quoted the fact that the use of models is extremely important in scientific reasoning, and not only, of course. And this is a series that I am directing at Springer, in which many of the people that are attending this workshop already published books or chapters or articles. And the name is Studies in Applied Philosophy, Epistemology, and Rational Ethics. You see that I use the word I like. I am basically interdisciplinary, and I like the adjective applied. There is also a reason, I am kidding, that my university, University of Pavia, was founded in 1361. The first class in philosophy that was inside the Faculty of Medicine, the first class of philosophy started in 1380, and the name was Practical Philosophy. So that it is very nice. I like this name of 1380. So thank you very much for your attention and patience. Okay. And of course, to the organizer, Raffaela and the others of this workshop, okay, that was scheduled the last year. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Lorenzo, for your very interesting, and the topic is important, the status of cognition nowadays. So I open the discussion.
May
yes. Professor Bitiello, okay.
Yes, you might
Hello.
also the late professor. We are, I am a student. Okay, no, I have, thank you very much, Professor Magnani. I enjoyed your talk. I'm not a philosopher, I'm a physicist. And what I could say, just to, how to say, to give a practical, you were mentioning a practical philosophy.
Okay.
I will say, you see, I am a philosophy doctor, by the way, in physics.
Of course, of course. The PhD,
of course.
The PhD is a
exactly.
philosophy doctor. And you have to be.
Yes. So let me how to say, use a sort of a metaphor. A computer can do computation, but cannot do science. You do science when you put creativity into play, and creativity is non-computational activity. According to Roger Penrose, which we know personally, or now he has been awarded the Nobel Prize, the activity of the mathematician is a non-computational activity. The activity of the mathematician is not giving the proof of a theorem, which is trivial in some sense from the point of view of logic, because is a chain of uniquely and necessary steps, which a machine can do. The activity of the mathematician is just to propose postulates, a consistent set of postulates. And postulates, as the name say, they are gratuitous. They are not necessary. So I thank you very much for your observations and your way of. So what I want to say that computational activity is not necessarily, I mean, is not yet science. Is not enough to have science. You need a scientist. You need a human to do that. Now there is a problem. The problem is that this is also a moral issue, because if one lives in the end of somebody who is enthusiastic, let's say in this way, of computational instruments, then and forget the other part, which I'm talking of, this human activity, then it will be a disaster. It's like leaving politics in the end of crazy people. I'm thinking of Hitler. That is just the computational part. And that is very bad if it is detached from the moral issue of implementing such a human ecology, as you were saying. Thank you very much.
Okay. So yours is, of course, I completely agree. And yours is a kind of additional and substantial consideration that is in tune with my presentation. Pay attention. I'm not, of course, the first that refers to the problem of limitations of computational system and so on. But I agree with you that when you say they are not yet able to make science, I totally agree, because mine is not a dogmatic idea, because the meaning of computation, I say, because I'm a fan of the so-called eco-cognitive computationalism, is something that evolves depending of the situation. Because I agree also with Susan that we are dealing with a lot of ignorant entities that become computational. Okay, and through computation become cognitive tools, because through computation they are able to manage cognition. So I also had the opportunity to see your chapter that you recently published in the logic of what was the name, Raffaela?
Yes, yes.
Social. I don't remember the name, the logic of social practices, yes. In which you explain, it is the last part of the paper, you explain some aspects related to thermodynamics and Amartya Sen points of view, yes, about society, yes, and so
with Professor Basti. Yeah.
With Professor Basti, of course, and you, in the last part, you said that you are in tune with my more epistemological and logico-cognitive consideration, not related to thermodynamics and physics and so on. So thank you for your further clarification of the problem.
May I'm sorry, I do not want to monopolize, but just one addition. May I propose to consider in the way of saying artificial intelligence, the word intelligence is a relational word, namely it means that there is something interesting in AI as far as there is the human component. Otherwise, there is no intelligence. And we could call it AS, where S stay for stupidity. I mean, without reasoning.
I agree. The example of AlphaGo and AlphaZero is interesting because AlphaGo, AlphaZero is extremely performative in managing locked strategies. Is better than human. So it is another kind of intelligence that we have to respect. Absolutely, that can be useful. But when you see that there are people that use a kind of ideology or philosophy and they say, we do not need any more scientific discovery, this is stupid. This is limited. This is
but
ignorant.
they are not dangerous because they will not go far away.
But you know, we are facing with the kinds of what I call over-computationalization. So no, for human beings, I said, I'm not the first that is referring to this kind of problems, but maybe I am the first that stress the attention to the problem of protecting eco-cognitive openness and scientific discovery, because I'm not sure that the excessive, I do not want to be against big pharma, that is also something obvious in this moment, but I'm not sure that the privatization, the total privatization or biopharmaceutical research did not jeopardize human creative cognition in that area on the part of humans. I'm not sure. I am a suspect. Okay.
Lorenzo, there is a nice question in the chat.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. See, from Simon Laub.
I found boring as instead of starting with functional pro, which was much more interesting. But they didn't see the difference. The terrestrial or out of a pickle chose the terrestrial. Okay, so yes, this is of course an interesting question about the rational and scientific character of the ecological commitment, you know. But you know that ecology is intertwined with science, but not necessarily something that can be totally justified with science. Okay, so imagine, for instance, the recent complication of the evolutionary theory with the theory of cognitive niches. That is, we humans, we are complicated the environment building cognitive niches, computers, bridges, atomic plants, and so on. This creates a kind of potential change of the evolutive pressure, you know, of the selective pressure. And this is human-made. So this is curious because you know that the tradition says that Darwin, the Darwinian evolution is blind. No, it is not so blind. There is a sense of purposefulness in the evolution. That is because of the acts of human beings. So this is, I think, the correct way of placing and situating the ecological reasoning in from the scientific point of view. The problem of possible maladaptive cognitive niches. Among them, provocatively, I think that a possible maladaptive cognitive niche is the one that jeopardizes human creativity. Consider that this already happened in the past. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the scientific reasoning was almost destroyed because in the Middle Age, for almost 1,000 years, we only had logic, theology, of course, religion, philosophy, but no more. that kind of proto-science that was the science of the ancient Greeks. So I would situate ecology in this way. I hope I was able to to answer the problem. Of course, consider that ecology sometimes is used by politicians. What are the corporations in a merely aggressive way to make their business.
Lorenzo, there are more questions for you.
Okay.
Zoran, and then yes, first Zoran, I think.
Thank you.
It is too.
And then Richard. Okay.
So we have time.
Yes, there is coffee break, but we have 7 minutes. Okay. 7 minutes, but the coffee break has no sense.
I'll be quick in the interest of time.
No, but no problem.
Thank you for your wonderful talk, Professor Magnani. I have a challenge for you. I'm a passionate chess player. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yes, and I also play Go, but I'm much better at chess. And the reason why I started playing chess, because I'm interested in open transparent artificial intelligence. And I was reading a lot about these chess engines, how they work, AlphaGo, AlphaZero, right? So I'm quite read on it. And you know, in chess community, there is always a challenge. There is this enigma we do not understand, right? Is every game a draw in chess? Theoretically, we don't know that. And I'm starting to thinking, you know, maybe it's one of these uncomputable problems that maybe doesn't have to do with the fact that you have exponentially hard problem, but maybe there is something fundamentally problematic with it. And I wonder, you know, what would be a philosopher's take on this? Because it's clearly that, you know, artificial intelligence cannot provide the answer. So you have to think outside of the system.
Okay, so
I don't know if you have that dilemma in the chess community, right?
Okay, so you are right. This is
because it's like church, you know, it's like Turing church thesis. You know, we believe it's correct, but you know, nobody has ever proven it.
Okay, of course, you can see chess from the point of view of game theory. You can see chess also from the point of view that you are referring to. In this case, you have to. If you have to win, you have the computer is better. If you have to analyze some aspects of the structure of the strategies and heuristics, you have to use human cognition and to analyze this aspect from a very abstract and idealized point of view. That is scientific cognition. Who is the other?
Okay. Richard Parker.
Richard,
you have to switch on your microphone.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Oh, okay.
Great, thanks. Okay, yes, actually one of the observations relates to the point that Zoran just made, and that is with regard to chess. And certainly I'd be very surprised if chess were ever solved by deep learning or any other method, because I've read that there's more possible games of chess than there are atoms in the visible universe. So on the other hand, as you may know, checkers, which is very interesting, or drafts as it's referred to in the UK, was very interesting from the point of view. It's one of the very first papers, I think, which mentioned machine learning, actually had it in the title, Arthur Samuel in 1959, some studies in machine learning using the game of checkers. But the interesting thing about that is that checkers has now been solved as a win for the first player. But I believe that was done largely by brute force, extreme vast amounts of computation. So I guess in Samuel's day, no one would ever thought of that possible. These days, we think probably games like chess and Go maybe not possible either, but who knows what could happen in the future. So that was just an interesting point following off from Zoran's point. The other point I was going to make, if there's time, I was interested in what Gianfranco was saying, because that seemed for me to relate to this ongoing discussion between what we call hard AI and soft AI, whereby if in the concept of hard AI, you're basically trying to create computers which simulate the way people think. But in soft AI, you're trying to create behavior which, if displayed by a human, would be considered intelligent. So that's a much less demanding.
Sorry, I lost your second point because there was an interruption of the internet. You said the second point is okay. Thank you.
Okay, so it was regarding Gianfranco's comments about what it means to have artificial intelligence. I think that this relates to the ongoing discussion between hard AI, where essentially you're trying to create intelligence which actually works whereas the human brain works and simulates what a human does. But a soft AI approach is where you're basically trying to create intelligence which would, or behavior which would be considered intelligence in the form of a human. So it's a less demanding thing. And my view is that there's value in both approaches. We need pragmatic approaches that solve real problems, but from a scientific viewpoint, it's important to try and understand and develop our knowledge about. So that was really just an observation rather than a question.
Okay. So it is difficult to answer to your question, but so you said that there is the problem of the way of making cognition and computation on the part of human brains and on the part of computers and so on. So in this case, I think that they are completely different things. Adopting the Susan Stepney approach and of her colleagues, so also brain is an ignorant physical and biological entity that is trained to make cognition, computation. It is not necessary to use the metaphor of computation, but it was used. Alan Turing exactly made the opposite, because Alan Turing said in the paper called Machine Intelligence, it seems to me, of 1948, said that to teach a digital computer to compute, we have to imitate, to mime the human education, okay? And this was very nice because it was, so to say, very clear about the fact that when you are teaching an object, a physical object, or an organic object, imagine the organic pieces of morphological computation to make computations, this is something that is variegated and that changes time after time. For instance, in the area of machine learning, that was also called, that you quoted, was also called machine discovery, there were many programs that were able to make scientific discoveries, also published in scientific journals. But the epistemological structure of the system was a diagnostic structure. Because, for instance, the system made very prehistorical of the AI by Herbert Simon, Bacon 1, 2, 3, 4, there were some hypotheses and the system was able to select the correct hypothesis in presence of some data. And so in this case, yes, okay, the result was the reproduction of scientific discovery, for instance, the law of gravitation, Ohm law, Boyle-Mariotte law, but with a system that in reality was a diagnostic system. So it is difficult to generalize these aspects, and I think that this idea of seeing computation as a kind of domestication of entities of any kind is very interesting and new, because avoids also some strong philosophical claims, and it is flexible also, because you can see computation evolving depending on the various substrates, not only digital computing.
Okay, thank you. Time for the next speaker. Thank you, Lorenzo, for your beautiful talk and for the discussion.
Thank you.
So I give the word to Vitiello and Basti, Professor Vitiello from the University of Salerno and Gianfranco Basti from Pontifical Lateran University, if they want to share their slides.
Yes, okay, let me say that I will start, but then I will leave, Professor Basti will talk after me. So our talk will be split in two parts.
You talk both, okay.
Yes, yes. At least we said that yesterday or something like that.
Okay.
So I need to share the screen because I have slides, and let me see.
Condividi.
Sì, condivido lo schermo. Facciamo così. Un momento soltanto. I hope you can see. Can you see this slide?
Sì, yes. Okay, it's okay.
Okay. So our common subject, common with Professor Basti, the subject is an approach to deep learning starting from quantum field theory. Quantum field theory is a mathematical framework used to study elementary particle physics, condensed matter physics, namely solid state physics. Modern physics, you need a quantum theory, and if you want to get understand or describe a little bit phase transitions, namely a system which live in a different phase, in following different dynamical regimes, if you want, then you need quantum field theory. So we use such a mathematical framework to analyze the possibility to improve the deep learning strategy. And of course, this is connected, as we have been seeing with Professor Magnani too, this is connected to the accountability, to ethical accountability of AI systems. So this is the general idea of the talk. And of course, the motivations to do that is because we are at a point where effectively, as we have been saying just in the past 40 minutes, such a kind of responsiveness of natural brain and instruments, unconscious AI agents, these are they necessarily get compared to a moral responsibility and the conscious human. So there is a moral and ethical problem there. Of course, this is within the common social linguistic environment in which you can operate. And now I will go quite fast on these first slides, because Professor Basti, much better than me, can frame the discussion in more general terms than I can do. And there is a point at the beginning of the story. The point is that Turing test, if you use a universal Turing machine, or if you want a general purpose programmable computer, you test that, and you say that if such an object can imitate in a successful way a human intelligence task, then there must exist, this is a postulate, there must exist some essential isomorphism between the program running in the computer and the neuronal activity in the brain. Now, if you just limit this to quite technical aspects, that is okay. But the point is that in time, such a statement has been too much stretched, let me say in this way, to the point to think that the brain is a computer, or vice versa, that the computer is like an artificial brain. And here there are problems. I will skip part of these slides, which I'm showing now to you, but for example, at the basis of such stretching the point, there is the mind-body relationship in terms of software and hardware. But this is completely not physically, how to say, justifiable. In fact, John von Neumann, who has been one of the father of many things, of quantum mechanics, computer science, logic mathematics, and so on, he was saying in 1958 in his book, the mathematical or logical language truly used by the central nervous system is characterized by less logical and arithmetical depth than what we are normally used to. We require exquisite numerical precision over many logical steps to achieve what brains accomplish in a very few short steps. Namely, it practically cancel any possible confusion between the brain, natural brain, I would say, natural brain, and machine. They have nothing to do. They work on different levels. But let me skip also this one, because in the course of the story of course, you can even go to show that there is logically inconsistent any attempt of identifying an intentional state of mind with observed state of brain or neural correlates. So, I mean, this story. But at some point, neurophysiological discoveries, I mean, observations in the laboratory, they did show that brain works in a nonlinear and chaotic, deterministic chaotic way. And this was mainly due to Walter Freeman. He started such kind of observations. So these are experimental observations. And they went through many others after his discovery. We are talking around 1959, but he was his experiment already in 57, 58, and so on. Now, this was determined the crisis of cognitive science, functionalism, and the consequent refusal of the AI dogma, one I was mentioning before. And they produced a new development in non-symbolic approach to machine learning. So they clarify that the AI dogma was something to be taken with a very careful in a very careful way, but also opened the way to different new approach to. Now, there is one technical but very important point which emerges, is that instead of using the early binary 0 or 1, new projects in machine, they work much better on the what is called the sigmoid activation function, which brings you to a continuous in the interval 0-1, not just only two possible on-off, yes or not, 0 or 1, but there is a full continuous set of possibilities. This opens the way to a beautiful new, how to say, mathematical application to computer machines. But let me go on, because now the problem, which is present problem, is that the random definition of weights among the different neurons in a machine, I'm thinking, constitute a big complex problem for the use, the application of AI. We are at a point where actual machinery is not enough to be applied to social, moral, legal, economical problems, because the relation between the data are changeable. We have a streaming-like data set to be accommodated into way to be useful. I mean, to make computations, and it is a big limitation. This is the problem on which one should work. So we have a big data, not only, but a big changeable data. Changeable means data they change by themselves, but also the relation between data they change. And then immediately you have to, I mean, you deal with what we call free will in a very, I apologize with philosophers, but here is just free will is what you do to reach a good, something which you feel good, a good goal. And Gazzaniga, for example, emphasized this point. And then responsibility and accountability comes, and you are already in a social and biological framework. No more just an engineeristic area where you have to use and to program and to do computations. Now, in such a situation, any individualistic monism or dualism is by definition excluded by the facts. You cannot think anymore in an atomistic way, where the world, in that vision, where the world is made by little balls, not interacting, individuals, which is at the basis, by the way, of the economy we have today. Professor Magnani, in one of his titles of papers, he had the word neoliberalism, which is based on individualistic activity without considering much this interrelation. Now, it is quite interesting to me to find that mathematics applied in the study of a brain by itself tells you that the crucial role, I'm reading, skipping because time is short, the crucial role of dissipation is that, I will tell you dissipation, what means here, is that self-mirroring is not anymore a self-trap, like with Narcissus. The conscious subject cannot be a monad, cannot. Here is mathematics. I do not write formula to do not, but cannot is just a strict mathematical derivation. Consciousness is only possible if dissipation, openness on the outside world is argued. Why I'm talking of dissipation? Because if you just think of that piece of matter, and which is not one in our school, the brain, but in some extended acception, including all the perceptive channels in our body, so some extended brain, if you want, but also the anatomical one, by the way, you realize that the brain is an open system. A system which is in a continuous exchange of energy, information, and whatever you want with the external world. The external world is also the inner world. So you cannot close the brain. Now, in the imperialistic acception of mathematicians and physicists, the mathematics we do have, the only one, the canonical, so-called canonical formalism, this is why I'm not talking of imperialism, I mean, the beautiful formula is just for closed system. We do not know how to deal with open system. And please notice, we only observe open systems. We never observe systems which are closed, systems such that there is no flux out of energy or out of energy. So we have to modify, in some sense, either the object of our study, the open system, or the mathematics we have. Now, since the high school, they were teaching to me that when you have an open system in thermodynamics, you have to consider the universe. And that to me was beautiful, because I was thinking of a real universe. But universe there and here is just means you have to close your system by adding that part of the environment to which in which the system is embedded, in such a way that to all of it looks like a closed system, in a good approximation. Physicists are very practical people. They do approximation. So as far as I can close the system in a good approximation, then, but this is what it means. This means that let me give you, just to make it light. I show you here a beautiful picture. This is by Caravaggio. This is Narcissus. Please look at this closed loop of the arms and their mirror image in the lake, in this pond. This is monad. This is lethal. This is the death. Narcissus and his image becomes a closed system, but Narcissus only sees himself in the lake. Now look at this one. This is Velázquez. This is in London at the National Gallery, and there is a discussion about this painting. This is a beautiful painting, of course. The discussion is if Velázquez knew or not the geometric optics laws. Why? Because you see, this is the mirror, and the observer sees the face of Venus, which means that Venus is not mirroring herself. Venus observes her observers, because if the mirror is like this, is in this angle, then Venus cannot watch at her face. The way, so in this painting, Venus is watching at you that are watching at her. So this is just the opposite of Narcissus. So this is a typical open system. So we have our system, and we have to introduce the environment. Now, when you do that, okay, this is a stupid bibliography for what I'm telling. So what you have to do, you have your system, let's say A denotes degrees of freedom of the system, and you have to double. You have to go from A to A cross A tilde. By A tilde, I mean the double of A. So mathematically, it is quite simple. A is defined as A cross 1, and A tilde is 1 cross A. Why? A here is the same of this one, because in the exchange with mirror, I mean, a flux out of me, they go in the environment. A flux from the environment came to me. So I have to exchange in and out. So the environment looks like my own image, time reversed, inverted in time, because I have to exchange in with out. So I have to flip this arrow. So I can describe from the point of view of balancing the flux, I describe the system and this environment as the time reversed image, like in a mirror, but this mirror is time. So I'm not saying any metaphysical thing, it's a very trivial thing. I mean, what gets out from me goes into the environment. So if I have to write a formula for the environment, the t variable, I have to put a minus if I take plus for my time. So this is just like two arrows on the same mirror. I mean, mirroring, one arrow mirroring itself, the time, the arrow of time. But this is crucial because now you deal with what is called technically a deformed Hopf algebra. which is a non-commutative algebra because of the deformation. And you have an object, a mathematical object, which you call a coproduct, non-commutative coproduct, where you have A cross Q plus Q to -1 cross A, where Q is exponential of a parameter. Now, you see, this parameter here makes the non-commutativity means that you can distinguish between the object you want to study, in our case the brain, and the environment. You cannot exchange them because they are weighted in a different way through this theta parameter. This brings you to a typical formalism, Bogoliubov transformations, and through this, you can describe phase transition. So this is the life of the brain. Brain is continuously undergoing different dynamical regime. There is, you see, this is the description of the present. The present is now, but is no more now because it becomes the future, and it was the past. So in this way, you have a dynamical description of the brain activity. So this is what I told you. And just to make it acceptable and easy to say all of this, I've called this description the image, the time mirror image of the subject is double, which is, you see, if you go to visit an exhibition let's say a painting or photographs, you can even realize the corner of the building that you see in the picture or the face of somebody you know. But when you get out from the exhibition, from the gallery, what you have seen? You have seen the author self-portrait. So you have seen the double of the author, how the author see whatever is in his paintings, in his photographs, or in his music, if it is music. So we have always a dialogue between ourselves, which is between the self, the brain, and the environment. And this is a dialogue, a continuous dialogue, a trade. And this is how to say, is also the content, the mathematical content of all of this description. And there is a theorem in quantum field theory that tells you that if the symmetry of the system is broken, namely if there is something which is a perturbation of the time evolution of the system, like an input from external, if I see something that came to my attention, I'm distracted by that, or I concentrate on that input. Such an input is taken as breaking a symmetry of the normal evolution of the brain. And the theorem tells you that at that point, to recover an overall symmetric structure, long-range correlations are created among the system components. Let me give you a practical example of these long-range correlations. You have a crystal. I use the crystal because it is easy to imagine. You have a crystal. What is a crystal? You have many, Avogadro number is a very large number, of atoms sitting each one in its lattice site. Now, who tells to those atoms to stay there, even vibrating? Who tells them to stay there? The elastic wave. This elastic wave, in a quantum way of saying, is made by quanta, and the quanta of elastic wave are the phonons. The photons are the quanta of the light. The phonons are the quanta of the elastic wave. So these phonons, they span the whole system, and they are the correlations of the atoms, keeping them in their position. So the crystal is made by their correlation. It's just like an orchestra, where the players are not forced to sit there and to with strong imposition, but they are tuned in phase. And what you listen is the orchestra music, not the single player music. So this is like a crystal. So here you have also, you leave the atomistic point of view of 1800th century, where things were made by little balls and you were making the kinetic theory of gases. Now you are making condensed matter physics, where the word condensed means that you have a correlation waves in the system. So this is a central point. Here, this is summarized. You have your system A sub k. This is something which makes a distinction between different degrees of freedom. For example, the momentum. Then you have to double, and you get AK and A tilde K, and all of it is a closed system now. And you study this closed system, and this is the balance between the fluxes. The energy of the system minus, because there is the inversion of a sign, the energy of the environment has to be zero. This is the balancing of the situation. Now, I should, unfortunately, I should stop, but let me go on a little bit, sorry. All of it means that you have a coherent state. Coherence, think of the orchestra. Coherence means that these correlations, they do not interfere negatively. They interfere positively. So the crystal, if you want, does not break out. Or the orchestra is playing like an orchestra, not fractioning in small group of players. So coherence is the crucial step to go from microscopic activity of the components to the orchestra music, to the macroscopic behavior of the system, which then you might even call macroscopic quantum system. Okay, so coherence, this is a coherent state. I do not have time to bring you, but it is very simple and very nice. But in any case, the crucial point of coherence is that the fluctuations in the elementary system is practically, you can forget about, because it goes, you see, the percent of fluctuation, delta n over n, where n is the general number, goes like the inverse of coherence. More coherent is the system, more stable it is. So it does not depend on fluctuations. And this means that your memory state is something which is written here in mathematics, but is an entangled state. You cannot separate A and A tilde, which was what I said before. A brain cannot be closed. And it is a time dependent, is a finite temperature, is responsive, and TA mode provides the address. TA tilde mode provides the address of TA mode, and vice versa. What means? Means that if you want a quantity, if you want to compute a quantity of TA mode, the system mode, they depend on TA tilde mode. So you can look at TA tilde to get some information about TA. This is just like looking at the address of something, and then you find that person at that street number 7, some number. So it's just like the address, A tilde played the role of the address of TMO. But this is crucial because this means that there is a sort of a truth evaluation function built in this mathematical structure, namely in the brain interacting with this environment. Because there is a continuous checking, comparison, dialogue, I said before, between A and A tilde. In such a way, if something does not correspond in such a dialogue, something is wrong or goes not in the proper way, then one is adapting on the other one. Indeed, we try to adapt the environment to our needs, and the environment tries to adapt us to some environment situation. And this can be used in a quantum deep learning. And you find also what Freeman already found, namely, you may move in the memory space through chaotic trajectories. And this makes the system highly responsive because it reacts immediately to a new situation. And then you have fractal self-similarity, and I mean, you have more things, but I want to leave, otherwise Professor Basti has very much short time. And let me show you, only look at this equation now. You see, at each time, this O of T prime, which is the state of the system of the brain, if you want the memory state, at the time T prime is different, namely, there is no projection of such a state on the state at the time t. So it's a completely new novelty, is a dimension of the brain functioning. And this goes along with what Professor Magnani was telling us about creativity. Creativity is a novelty, otherwise it's not creativity, is a consequence, an obvious consequence of what it was before. There is nothing new. So this system, this mathematics includes these things. But let me stop here. This is trajectory. Okay. You see, you might give exact formulas to describe what I'm telling you in words, and you reach a point where you see that memory is not memory of information, is memory of meanings. We only remember what it is meaningful to us. We do not remember information. Information is non-relational. As soon as information becomes something which is relational, namely acquires a meaning, then is useful or interesting for us. So this is the main one of the main results of what I'm saying. You have the sigmoid function. You have a lot of the intentionality is building in the system. And I was working with Professor Basti and with Walter Freeman. So Walter Freeman, he was how to say, the real neuroscientist. I'm only a physicist. Professor Basti is a philosopher and scientist, mathematician. But Walter Freeman, he was the one watching at the brain in a laboratory. So we were relying, and what we were working out was tested in some sense. He was our experimentalist, if I would say like that. And the physicist, I mean, there is no theoretical physics or experimental physics. Physics is just one, theory and experiment, Galilean physics. There are fractal involved in the observation, but I stop here, please, don't tell me. Let me tell you, of course you can go to those streaming of data through this situation, but maybe Professor Basti will tell you more about that, and also go to this Amartya Sen problem, trying to avoid how to say injustice from AI algorithms, and have a relational ethical approach with an ethical accountable AI. And this was comparative distributive justice of Amartya Sen, which has the problem of being applicable. Too many data, too many changeable data. We hope that through this way, we can perform some. Now, I close it really. If ever it will be constructed an AI device endowed with consciousness, because that is a big problem, is the big problem, it must take upon itself the best of the human model, unpredictably erratic, able to learn but unfaithful, full of doubts, full entangled to the world but irreducible free. How we must call it or her, I don't know, Spartacus. At that point, we will have Spartacus. This is to great Professor Sabin, who did not put any patent on the vaccine. He never got the Nobel Prize. This is a very actual situation with this COVID problem. When he discovered the vaccine for poliomyelitis with SARS, they decided to do not put any patent on it. But there was no Nobel Prize for them. This is shame for the Nobel Prize committee. Glory to Sabin and Sachs. So I would like, okay. This is AI. This is a very primitive AI systems. Captain Hook and Wooden Legs Pirate. Hope it will be useful like that, the AI we have today. Thank you. Maybe now Professor Basti could join.
Okay, we wait for Basti slides, or if are the same.
Sorry, I was deactivated the audio. You see my screen now?
Not yet.
Not yet. Perché mi dice questo?
Okay, now.
Yeah?
Yes.
But you see a co-FT approach, the title, you see this?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So now is the part, so the problem at issue, Giuseppe just hinted this, is the algorithm injustice of artificial intelligence system for supporting social economical decision. I quote from a paper presented in AISB2021. He excited a big discussion. Also Nature published a special issue about these problems. So the problem is this, when I quote, I read, when machine learning systems that infer and predict individual behavior and action based on superficial extrapolations are deployed into social world, various unintended problems arise. This system pick up social and historical stereotypes rather than any deep fundamental causal explanations. In the process, individuals and groups, often at the margins of society, that fail to fit stereotypical boxes, suffer the undesirable consequences. Various findings illustrate this. Bias in detecting instinct tones in pedestrians, bias in predictive policing systems, gender bias and discrimination in the display of STEM career ads, racial bias in recidivism algorithms, bias in the politics of search engines, bias and discrimination in medicine, and bias in hiring, to mention but few. So, which is the root of this problem? The root is this, that neither people nor the environment are static. What society deems fair, equitous, and ethical changes over time. The concept of fairness and ethical practice is, therefore, a moving target and not something that can have a final answer or can be solved once and for all. It is possible that what is considered ethical currently and within certain domains for certain societies will not be received similarly at different time in another domain or for a different society. This is the core of a relational ethics, okay? So the solution avoiding these problems requires indeed developing and deploying ethical algorithmic systems in the context of a relational approach to ethics. The problem is that we must formalize, because otherwise we are not in computability theory. And so the most advanced approach to relational ethics in social science is the theory of comparative distributive justice, quoted by Giuseppe before, developed by the Nobel laureate in economy Amartya Sen, in the formal context of the social choice theory, of which the same Sen was one of the founders. What is social choice theory? I quote from the Nobel lecture of Sen. Consider that he was awarded with the Nobel for his study on poverty, but he decided to give his Nobel lecture on the social choice theory because if we don't formalize social sciences in a rigorous way, they remain homilies, okay? The ethical often homilies. We must transform these ideas in more economical models. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So for this reason, Sen decided to dedicate his Nobel lecture on this problem, that is a social choice theory. He himself developed, one of the main developers. Provides a general approach to the evaluation of and choice over alternative social possibilities, including inter alia the assessment of social welfare, inequality, and poverty. If there is a central question that can be seen as the motivating issue that inspires social choice theories, is this: how can it be possible to arrive at cogent aggregative judgments about the society, the aggregation of variables? You know, that is the main problem in statistics, okay? For example, about the social welfare, the public interest, or aggregate poverty. Given the diversity of preferences, concerns, and predicaments of the different individuals within the society, how can we find any rational basis for making such aggregative judgments as the society prefers this to that, or the society should choose this over that, or this is socially right? Okay, of course we are in the framework for modeling these ideas of a deontic modal logic concerning alternative possible states of the social world that are ordered according to a given ranking, depending on different ethical, political, economical value system. That is, different rankings of social states which are satisfying different maximality, not optimality, that is maximally good for all the different contexts, because we search for the optimal state, optimal ordering. This is an ultra filter. This is not computable. Okay, so we are searching for maximality criteria of goodness for the different individuals and groups. Indeed, to suppose one only total social ordering in a pluralistic and complex society such ours is not only illusory but dangerous. In fact, the revolutionary theory of Sen is based on comparative distributive justice as shared partial social orderings. Partial orderings, remember, you are a computer scientist, so you understand immediately. Because satisfying the axiom of identity among social state rankings in order to maximize on a local contextual basis the personal flourishing. Is just a moment, but is the courier is ringing the bell. Just a moment. Because I am alone.
Cos'è? Music.
This is the beautifulness of Zoom meetings.
Sorry, because I am at home. And so the problem is that we have what means comparative distributive justice, that extended sympathy, that I identify my ranking with the ranking of another person, another group, in the context of the relational or the social brains explained by Giuseppe before. Okay, axiom identity among social state range in order to maximize on a local contextual basis the personal flourishing of individuals and groups. Formally, this logic is a deontic intentional interpretation of Kripke's modal relational logic, which in its model theory, differently from Tarski's classical one, admits the notion of partial truth. True in alternative possible worlds. In our case, is possible possible social worlds or possible social state of the world that for its complete justification requires eco-algebraic semantics of the Boolean algebra with operators, this is Johnson and Tarski, in the framework of the momentous Stone representation theorem for Boolean algebras, and then of the category theory formalism as common meta-language of operator algebras in topological logic. This is Goldblatt, because topological logic in the context of operator algebra is both extensional mathematical logics, yesterday we discussed about this, and intentional, that is modal philosophical logics, and then topological, not only in operator algebra in topological logic, but also in topological mathematics and physics. Remember that intentional logics are different semantics of the necessity possibility operators of modal calculus, mainly in analytic, logical and causal or ontic, epistemic, deontic context, defining as many different truth criteria. This is the logic, sorry. In the paper there is the explanation. Remember this, what states the Stone theorem? The Stone theorem states the isomorphism of dual equivalence between a Boolean algebra and an ultrafilter of partially ordered closed sets, effectively intervals or real numbers, defined on a Stone topological space. That is, for each Boolean algebra, its semantics is given on a partially ordered set of the power set of a given set. This is the formula. The duality between the category of Boolean algebras and the category of the Stone space, of course, in category theory, is given by the fact that a monotone function from the Boolean algebra A to the Boolean algebra B corresponds to a continuous function from the Stone space B to the Stone space A. This is reversed. This means that the signature of a Boolean algebra with operator is defined by operators acting on a topology of a complex algebra structure, A+, that is in a structure algebra subalgebras of sets. So that the signature is this, because instead of the classical signature of Boolean algebra, not and or, okay, here we have operators. And so we can include, because we are in an algebra, in an algebraic framework. That is, we do not pass from algebra to set theory. We are from an algebra to a complex algebra. So that we have a Boolean algebra with operators in which, in the signature, we can include also the true-false, of course, in algebraic fashion, operators. Okay? This is so powerful, so powerful. This is developed in theoretical computer science by Venema, he's a professor in the Amsterdam University. And so, indeed, the main difficulty for developing mathematical models of relational ethics following the social chess theory of Sen theory, both in macro and microeconomic, in microeconomy, as Sen emphasized many times, is the necessity of a dynamic weighing of the variables and fitting with the ordinary method of statistical analysis. In AI machine learning, this is the same problem we are faced with high-speed data streams, information, extraction, classification, analysis, for instance, from sensor networks, healthcare monitoring, social networks, financial markets, displaying an unbounded or infinite, I remember yesterday, an infinite character, effectively an unbounded character, because of the presence in them of long-range and higher-order correlations among data that are continuously changing over time. For them, classical machine learning algorithms, for instance, the stochastic gradient descent, based on the distinction between learning and testing phase conceived for static database, are unsatisfactory. That is, we need nets in continuous learning, like our brain. Our brain is not learning and testing, it's in continuous learning, not like our classical machine learning, because based on statistics, and then we distinguish between learning and testing phase. Of course, the QFT described by Vitello is fantastic in this framework. For this reason, I started to collaborate also with him because immediately I understood that, okay, the solution to the problem is there. So, what is category theory? Category in the algebraic structures is this. You need that is very low demanding, because the only axiom that they must satisfy is associativity and identity, which is the power of category theory as meta language of mathematics and logic with respect to set theory. In set theory, you are depending on the predicate logic, okay? Because you depends on Russell Principia, set elemental primitive, that is, each object for existing in set theory must be an element of the extension of a given function predicate in the limit of the universal class V, the extension of the meta function predicate being true in this theory. So, how can modeling this the construction of the domain on a given predicate of function is impossible in this formalism. On the contrary, in category theory, was conceived precisely for this aim, category theory. The primitives are morphism, arrows, intended as relational generalization notions as function, operator, map. Lorenzo before quoted Peirce. Effectively, this is the formalization of Peirce intuition, okay, of a relational algebra, okay, as basis of logic. Then the identity arrow such that for each object acted there exists a reflexive morpheme, so that an object is a reflexive morpheme. Particularly, everything is relational in this approach. And two maps, and this is the core, two maps or operations from arrows to objects, assigning a domain or codomain that is a source and target to each arrow. That is, I constitute in this way the domain of a predicate. I don't need to suppose them. This is the power in in theoretical computer science of this formalism. The composition of arrows occurs, and then these primitives must satisfy two axioms regulating compositions and identity, that is associativity law, remember the scheme before, and identity or unity law. And so the fundamental object of category theory are arrows, morphism, and therefore a category in this anti-predicative sense is any structure in logic or mathematics structure preserving morphism. Because it is important that we are in a non-symbolic or anti-predicative. Because, for instance, when I have to define, as we do after, the semantics of a Boolean logic over, and so a Boolean algebra, over the coalgebra of physical states, like in, for instance, in Vitello QFT. Okay, I can do this because it's sufficient an homomorphism between these two structures. If I stay in classical predicative category theory, okay, Wittgenstein say me, mistake, this is a category jump. Because of course, you are in a realm, another realm, how you mix physics with logic. On the contrary, in category theory, this is possible because it is possible.
Gianfranco, sorry, we are almost at the end because
okay,
it
we're
is
finishing this.
okay.
I stop here, and then rest is
no, okay, just to end your presentation.
Okay, then sorry, and because functors, what is are morphism between or homomorphism between categories, and what is nice in that I can map practically a category over another. Okay, homomorphism up to isomorphism. This up to means the homomorphism is in this direction. If it is invertible, there is a natural transformation for inverting this homomorphism. It is an isomorphism. That is a bijective relationship that becomes biunivocal. Okay? Because in set theory, if you are bijective, you are biunivocal. But in category theory, no. You can be bijective without being biunivocal, because only if there is the reversal of the homomorphism, it is an isomorphism. This is so powerful. And so two categories can be equally homomorphic up to isomorphism if the functor G connecting them is contravariant. That is, I can make this mapping without reversing the direction of arrows and the order of compositions, but I can do the same, that is, I can justify an homomorphism if I have a reversal of the arrows and the order of composition. And this is the case of coalgebras and algebras, because coalgebras and algebras are dual as each other. That is, are characterized by a reversal of the arrows and the composition orders. So that practically, in other terms, truth is invariant for such an exchange operation over the statements. That is, two statements are dually equivalent. For instance, these are defined in a category, and it's true if and only if the opposite statement defined in the opposite category is true. And this is the notion of bisimilarity. It's a technical symbol. That is not, this is a dual equivalence, functorial. Okay? Because it's defined on two different categories, but related by an homomorphism and a limiting isomorphism. Okay? That is contravariant. In this way, practically, I can define the semantics of a Boolean algebra with operators in a coalgebra. And so, sorry, only for finishing here. Because I can construct, no, sorry, this idea, otherwise you don't understand it, because the problem is the bounded operator. So this, if I am working with data streaming, I have the problem of bounding this. That is, operators must be upper and lower bounded. And this can be realized using the notion of categorical duality between algebras and coalgebras. This is a coalgebra, okay? Functorially dual with respect to an algebra, if I have a functor for making the reversal. And because I can define in a category of coalgebra, for instance, for a given functor omega, a final coalgebra that is a condition of upper closure condition, sorry, not closer upper closure condition, that is, if there is this unique homomorphism from a given category final coalgebra and all the coalgebras in the category, okay? This is a unique homomorphism. On the contrary, in the Boolean algebra, in the algebras, that is, I have an initial an initial algebra A such that there is a unique homomorphism making this. Why is so important? You remember that Giuseppe before spoke that said that in the category of coalgebras of quantum field theory, there is the possibility of a unique indexing of the different phase coherence domains in a given balanced state. Okay, these indexings are addressing of memories. Okay, and if we satisfy this condition, because practically we have a category of coproducts or coalgebras, but I have a unique functor indexing all the coproducts, all the coalgebras. So I have the possibility of phase transition, because phase transition means that the inner correlations are changing, so that I have a data streaming, okay? And then by the doubling of the degrees of freedom between a coalgebra and an algebra, I make indexing this progressively, of course, this stream of data, simply working on a phase coherence domain, including the system and the thermal bath. Of course, I have to implement this in a, this is the idea. This is a streaming data in non-well-funded sets that is in which unbounded chain of inclusion are allowed, so that you have not total ordering exactly for modeling a data streaming. There is no total ordering. How is it possible to imagine a total ordering? You have only partial ordering. And in theory of non-well-funded sets, you have data from this upper set. The other subsets are unfolded according to different inclusion paths, so that they are equivalent in the root, but absolutely inequivalent in the branching, because the branching of the process is absolutely not totally ordered. Only partial ordering is possible, but partial ordering are necessary and sufficient for justifying my Boolean algebra. Understand the idea?
Gianfranco, I think that you can go ahead later in the discussion. I give the word to Michael now, Michael Barber.
So I stop here.
He is the next speaker. Okay, yes. And but we can have discussion later. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
I stop.
Okay. So I give the word to Michael now.
Okay.
Thank you, Gianfranco. Thank you also Vitiello, Professor Vitiello, for the very, very nice presentation. And but we can discuss later.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Can I use the PowerPoint? I've got a PowerPoint. I think I can do that, huh?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, is that visible to people?
Okay.
Can people see that? Now can you see it?
Okay.
Good. So I want to thank
the audio is a little bit disturbed.
Okay.
If you can improve the audio.
The way I can do that is by leaving and coming right back, if that's okay.
I hope Michael can enter again. Gianfranco, you have time to speak again. My God, to take the slot off. Michael, I hope we can have a good connection. If you want to talk a little bit before Michael come about the end of your paper, and then.
Sorry, this is very important because this is the core idea formally, that you can have by this mirroring between an algebra, its coalgebra. It's like the mirroring of the brain with its environment of Giuseppe before. But formally, I can have operators bounded upper and lower simply by mirroring by the dual equivalence in a algebraic structure of partially ordered set and the Boolean algebra on the other side. Okay, Boolean algebra with operators. It is a strong formalism, okay? And so in this way, we can justify, of course, I jump all the formal passages, the bounded morphism between Kripke models, okay, algebraically and algebraically defined in the category theory called algebraic semantics Boolean algebra with operators. Consider, sorry, only this idea. Remember this, that generally, when we are in classical set theoretical logic, we define, for instance, a Boolean statement over a structure of set, its extension is set to set subset structure. In this case, we are satisfying a given Boolean formulas over a complex algebra, okay? And generally, the validation direction is from the algebraic structure from the formal algebraic structure S to its extension of the complex algebra in this direction. This is validating phi, and then over extension is validating phi prime, and is hidden under the
Okay, Gianfranco. Michael is entered. Now we see if all functions.
Yes, okay, I stopped.
Okay,
again.
okay, sorry. Thank you.
No problem.
Better, good to have you as co-organizer. So flexible co-organizer. Michael?
Okay. Can you hear me now? Is it better?
Yes, very good. Okay.
Okay, good. Is that okay now? No?
It's okay.
Okay.
It's okay.
You can see it.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a little, I want to thank the people for inviting me to attend this conference. It's been very interesting. My paper is on a little different approach. It comes out of phenomenology. It's called Typifications, Play, and Ritual. It's a connection trying to work between sort of phenomenology and anthropology. I think it gets at one of the themes of the conference, representation and reality in humans, other living organisms. And so humans and other living organisms is rather central here. just as an introduction, Robert.lowe said that ritual is the primordial form of serious play in human evolutionary history. And so what I'm going to try to do is not so much of a biological evolution, going back to animals and then beyond that to our origins evolutionarily in a biological sense, but to take sort of a genetic phenomenological investigation, starting with sort of the everyday life world of meaning, and then seeing how out of that life world we get different kinds of what Alfred Schutz calls finite provinces of meaning, such as theory, fantasy, dreaming, play, religious experience, art, etc. And central to any of those what are called provinces of meaning and the everyday life world out of which they grow is the whole idea of typifications, which are typical regularized patterns of acting and interpreting, which characterize everyday life and provinces of meaning themselves. Ordinary language is a treasure trove of those kinds of typifications. So what I want to argue is that play builds on and modifies everyday typifications, and then ritual depends on both play and the typifications. So typifications in the Schutzian life world of Alfred Schutz, rules, and of course we have rules and classifications and systems of language. Everyday life typifications are governed by pragmatic relevances, ultimately traceable to the fundamental anxiety about one's death. So one is trying to really come to terms with everyday life, and that includes things like eating and traveling and walking to places and doing all kinds of things, which we typically know how to exercise. Even infants, haphazard moments, serve certain what Schutz calls relevances, things that you desire. So typifications are connected to what our desires and values are, in which, so a haphazard movements, in a sense, which serve their relevances, that through them, the infant acquires the sense of, I can do it again. Husserl talked about the scissors. Once a child experiences the scissors, the next time they know they have an idea of what it's for, how it works, etc. And then a typification becomes a non-discursive component in a whole stock of knowledge with relevances and values. So typifications are actually acquired through passive synthesis or association, not by inference or reflection. I learned to talk by hearing someone else and sort of passively synthesizing my behavior with someone else. Same with walking, eating, any number of things that belong to everyday life. So what happens is too, that we come to terms with imposed relevances, which Schutz calls imposed values in a way. The example would be of a little child who sees its parents across the room and it doesn't know quite how to get to them. It's an imposed relevance, this distance, but the child figures out how to crawl, perhaps by having seen other people do it, or perhaps by making movements that are sort of tentative, until finally it crawls across the room. And then that's a way of coming to terms and overcoming an imposed relevance, then the distance that the child found between itself and its parents. Notice this is all subjectively intertwined because the parents are encouraging it. It has a value of being with its parents, etc. So the sense then of I can do it again. Once the child does engages in a sort of a typified repertoire, it has a sense of I can do it again. It gives confidence, a sort of corporeal memory within the infant's and adult's genetic constitution. So that's what goes on in everyday life. Typifications are essential to them. Now, what I want to talk about is plays, life, the sphere of play. What happens in play? Play's life-worldly roots and typification. The playfulness of typifications is involved in this. In a sense, the very enactment of a typification consists in facing an object that never exactly coincides with one's previous typification. One may crawl one time and then do it the next time, but it's not quite the same situation. And this lack of coincidence, this not according with one's typification based on previous experience, this exceeding what the typification encompasses, presents a small kind of imposed relevance that one brings under one's control by employing the typification and finding it effectively functional. The scissors would be an example. You have one scissors in your hand. 2 days later, you come across something that looks like the same scissors that you had before, and the child learns to use them or play with them in the same way. And so they're overcoming what I can call an imposed relevance. Namely, this isn't quite the same situation I faced before, but nevertheless, by a sort of experimental method, the child's able to master these tools. So the adventure of games and play grow out of this indeterminism, uncertainty for outcomes that are not necessarily predictable, as in games. So even with any ordinary basic typifications, the child is is kind of engaging in an experiment, kind of an adventure. There's an indeterminism and uncertainty, which the child manifests mastery by its ability to take control of the situation by using a typification. But there's a kind of game-like quality to it. So the child experiences satisfaction, increased confidence, even an inchoate joy about successful typifying. The first time the child crawls across the room, it has maybe that sense, although it's probably socially generated by the parents too. Mimicry then develops out of this. Children will use a banana for a telephone receiver. That's a kind of typifying, seeing a synthesizing in some ways, what one's seen in one's parents using the phone and the shape of the banana. And this proves successful. It demonstrates mastery and also confers a sense of satisfaction, joy by assimilating one's behavior with one's parents' behavior. There are animal resemblances here. Young female chimpanzees, for instance, cradle logs or rocks like mothers with an infant, mother chimpanzees. There's sort of a virtual mothering going on, an environmental mastery, identification with one's mother, even among chimpanzees. Dogs or cats play. More powerful animals among them, for instance, allow the younger ones to attack, but there's sort of biting softly. The claws are retracted. It's a virtual combat, playing with a virtual imposed relevance of an actual attacker. So they're acting in this play as if the mother dog or the father dog, whatever it is, actually were an attacker, and then they're sort of responding, but it's all playfully reenacted. So you've got an imposed relevance of an attacker with which in the ordinary life of an animal, they have to kind of do that. They come to terms with an attacker, which is an imposed relevance. You've got to do something about it. You've got to respond to it. But the interesting thing is that animals actually engage in virtual kinds of play like that, where they will act as though the more powerful dog, for instance, is an attacker, and then come to terms with it by biting or clawing or in some kind of combat, although it's all done in a virtual manner, so claws are retracted, the bites are soft, etc. So you get typical responses as if playfully generated by a playfully generated sort of imposed relevance. And it's as if it's pleasurable in itself for animals. As a matter of fact, there's information about animals so engaged, deer, so engaged in sort of some playful activity that they don't see an approaching lion, for instance. And they're so absorbed in the play itself that in some sense they're not even alert to sort of self-preservation. That's one of the difficulties. So as a summary, this business about typifications and play, the playful animal conflict, in playful animal conflict, it is though animals playfully generate a virtual battle, an imposed relevance, just for the sake of engaging in other typical behaviors, virtual biting, virtual scratching, and virtually coming to terms with that imposed relevance, as if the struggle and feeling of resultant success were a pleasure all by themselves. Animal and human enjoyment of pretending then demonstrates the playful dimensions of deploying typifications, namely the passive creative synthesizing without any kind of rational inference by which animals and humans can join under typifications, an object or event that was previously encompassed by it or by a typification, and a new under that typification, and a new similar event or object, but also dissimilar to it and even exceeding it. A virtual combat differs from a past experience actual combat. Such a playful deployment of typifications reenacts both the challenge of coming to terms with an imposed relevance with what might seem to interrupt one's regularized schemes of interpretation or pragmatic mastery, and also the enjoyment of striving to overcome such impediments and actually overcoming them, even if all this is done only virtually. Typifications then pertain to the very structure of play. Now, what I'd like to do is talk now about ritual coming out of typifications and play. Ritual, like typifications and play, also deals with imposed relevance, not a benign interruption to be overcome in pleasurable forays, but rather painful disruptions needing repair and restored equilibrium. Animals engage in ritualized dances to demarcate their territory in uncertain or conflicted circumstances. And Ellen Dissanayake identifies a ritualized human behavior, biologically based, that's universal, cross-culturally observed, the gestural and vocal interaction interactions between mother and an anguished infant, which involve mutual gazes, soft, high-pitched sounds, sympathetic touching, and hugs. This is a kind of ritual that is meant to overcome a situation that is painful, a disruption that needs some kind of reparation. Erickson, Rappaport, and Otto all say that the pre-verbal infant's experience of its mother resembles the worshiper's experience of God. Ritual, then, is a way of coming to terms with an imposed relevance, like crawling across the floor for a child, a kind of typifiable behavior, and like the virtual imposed relevances in pretend animal combats, to be overcome by playful movement. So what you've got in typifications are imposed relevances that children learn to come to terms with and develop typifications to handle them. And also animals engage in an imposed relevance, a virtual imposed relevance in playing and pretending, and they come to terms with that. So also rituals are a matter of coming to terms with an imposed relevance by engaging in some kind of typical patterns of action. Rituals then relieve individual and group anxiety by instilling confidence and fostering a sense of control over disturbing circumstances. That's from Dissanayake, through typified actions. Examples of ritual doing this. The Manus, as Margaret Mead noted, chant monotonous tones when cold and frightened. Trobrianders engage in sing-song melodies during terrifying storms. Rituals draw on a behavior reservoir found in the mother-infant interactions. Singing, dancing, breathing in unison, beating of drums to the tempo of heartbeats, repeated prayers, the whole notion of flow and Csikszentmihalyi. Occasions, so you can see that these are examples of imposed relevances where people come to terms with them by typified, regularized patterns that are repeated and actually end up resolving, in a sense, the handling with the imposed relevance. Occasions when rituals are practiced often consist in threatening imposed relevances and calendar changes, the beginning of a new year, terrifying life transitions, liminal celebrations, as Turner talks about them, the passage to motherhood, the passage to becoming a king, where you have liminal celebrations, food scarcities, the prehistorical Maltese groups, when there was a danger of a scarcity of pigs, they would engage in rituals, tree planting, Rumban termination of warfare among the Mering, and the reinforcing deteriorating moral orders or reassuring bog Irish immigrants in England. These are occasions when rituals are practiced. So there are parallels and differences with play between rituals. If you look at rituals and play, clearly there are differences between the imposed relevances with which play and ritual deal, between relevances offering a challenge to be surmounted playfully, in which the play itself may be of more value than any outcome, and those that pose a cosmic, momentous, or communal threat to be addressed in ritual. That's just from my paper that I turned in. Rituals are to be found in, and here's where Schutz talks about different provinces of meaning. I'm trying to really apply these provinces back to these kinds of things. So rituals actually involve a different province of meaning from pragmatic everyday life bent on practical mastery of our life circumstances, deploying pragmatic rationality aimed at controlling. So everyday life is built on this mastery of one's environment. And in a sense, ritual kind of is another way of mastering, but it's a way of mastering by not mastering in a sense. One seeks to restore lost community, for instance. One displays formality, invariance, and canonicity in rituals to show that the rituals are not of our making. Therefore, it's not like pragmatic mastery. We've got these rituals that we must just carry out, and they've been handed down to us or given by a divinity. Bateson talks about dealing with problems like death, loss, tragedy, that pragmatic rationality cannot handle. Those are handled within rituals often. They're often enacted when a community reaches the end of its resources and turns to a power beyond itself, when communities do that. In Schutz's terms, a different form of spontaneity rules in everyday life and in ritual. It's a much less pragmatically oriented sort of procedure that really involves giving up an effort at pragmatic control. And there are different other aspects of provinces of meanings in play and in ritual, a different province of meaning, signaling that one is entering another province by deploying what an epoche. Now, Husserl calls the epoche the thing that opens up the phenomenological sphere, but Schutz uses it analogically to describe how when you open up a province of meaning, you give some kind of signal. For instance, he'll talk about drama when the curtain opens now we're in a new realm, the sphere of the drama, a new province of meaning. In play, animals actually signal to each other. They drop down on their forelegs or they wag tails. Cats arch backs or paddle their back legs. And there's sort of, this is an epoche. This is sort of indicating to, it's a signal to other cats and dogs that now we're going to play. Now we are not going to be involved in biting or real scratching, but something akin to that. Rituals are also demarcated off from everyday life. There's sacred spaces or times, costumes, invitations to enter a sphere with others. I would bring that, there's a lot of work, some work being done on the connections between sports and rituals and how they are parallel to, you get into a whole different world in a sense at a sports stadium. It's a separated area, a special time. People behave in different kinds of ways than they do in everyday life. These provinces then have a different ontological status, and Schutz would include in that a different tension of consciousness, much like dreaming or fantasy can be a more relaxed tension of consciousness, a different form of spontaneity, not trying to achieve pragmatic goals, and a different sense of oneself, a more relaxed, calm, less intent on pragmatically mastering a situation. So there's a new typified patterns of action to replace those that would be ordinarily operative in everyday life. So Dissanyake's example of the mother with the child, the kinds of hugs and caresses and singing are different in a sense. Those are whole new sets of typifications that sort of enter into a ritual that breaks out from everyday life, which the infant may be feeling terror about if there's some kind of problem with its stomach or who knows what kind of feelings it's undergoing. So to conclude, what I'd like to do is just talk about imagination and creativity in typification, play, and ritual. Typifications, events, and objects not experienced, they are not experienced just as one-time experience, but these experiences and their typifications equip recipients to deal productively with future objects and events that are not quite the same, but still sufficiently associated that we can deal with them and give them meaning. Even the new individual object confronting one is seen to be like that which one has experienced before and with which one is able to interact. The child has this sense of, I can do it again in dealing with an object that is already typified, already part of its stock of knowledge. Dorian Cairns made the comment that the fundamental tendencies of mental life are tendencies to identify and assimilate. So also, I think typifications involve an experimental attitude toward life, as if a typification were semi-hypothetical. You venture one, and if it doesn't work, you can resort to another one. Even animals do this, children do this. A new typification can be deployed if the first one doesn't work. Even animals engage in such processes when they figure out ways to work around imposed relevances. So there's a kind of, this is really creativity, I think, at work in typifications. Then if you go to play, the mimicry of play, the banana becomes a telephone receiver. There are unexpected syntheses that come along, that much like metaphor, right? Where you can talk about, you bring together categories that just didn't fit before. So the child can also turn a banana into a telephone receiver, a production of virtual worlds, as we've seen with animals, and children do that all the time too, in which that one might posit an imposed relevance and then transcend it, as animals do in play. Children do that in play too. So animal play, one wonders if it seems to be just for pure enjoyment. Hard to admit, it's probably anthropomorphic, but it does seem that there's a sort of pleasure that animals get from this, and a breaking free from pragmatic everyday life. One's not really defending against an actual attacker, but playfully dealing with one. And in a sense, one builds a parallel life beyond being pragmatically bound to the world we start with. So it's a extra pragmatic kind of province of meaning. And finally, in ritual too, communities facing life and death imposed relevances can let go of them and their misery and transpose themselves to a separate sphere. It's parallel to fantasy, to literature and play, which are finite provinces of meaning for Schutz. I think rituals are also like that. And play, in which one leaps with freedom out of the world of pragmatic everyday life, whose imperatives can hold us in bondage. So one transcends a world that seems to permit no escape. And so in the end, I come back and say, maybe all of this goes back in some sense to Husserlian phenomenology, when Husserl developed the idea of the epoche, by which one broke from the world of everyday life to consider it, to think about it. But he saw that as opening a novel, unexplored realm that the natural attitude could never have imagined. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for your talk. It's okay. I am a sociologist and a philosopher, first sociologist. So I know Schutz. I really appreciate Schutz, and it's not far from creativity as Lorenzo think about. And Schutz is very important also for economics, because he is against von Mises and the Austrian school about the conception of Homo economicus, and against the rational choice theory of today. So it's very, very important to study Schutz and Garfinkel in this context of everyday life. In my opinion, much better habits and rituals than formalize this action theory. Okay, formalize is important, but you must understand what humans really do, and maybe artificial intelligence is like a ritual for human beings. So I really appreciate your talk. What I think that can be important is I want to give space for question for both, for you and for Vitiello and Basti, so that we can discuss a little bit also the paper before we were a little bit late. So I thank you, Michael, for taking a few space, but I think we can discuss again. I love Schutz, really. Because he started from Max Weber too, and change Max Weber action theory and another kind of intending types of action. So it's very, very important. And Schutz is not very known, I must say, but must be studied more, in my opinion. I have him in my course, so I give a lecture on Schutz also. Okay, so I leave space for question about Vitiello and Basti paper and Michael, both. Are there questions?
I would just like to say thank you for making the reference to Professor Magnani's and the other Professor Vitiello's and Basti's presentations, because I do think that notion of creativity is something that really connects me to what they were saying.
So I wonder if Gordana or Lorenzo want to ask anything about also the physical theory.
Okay, I have a question. If you are familiar, you made a claim that brain is not a computer, but the question is what computer is, what we can call a computer. We were talking about the brain being open system and always in the process, in change and the learning. So we are learning about possibilities to compute or to construct computers in a different way from what it was in the time of classical cognitivism, when Turing machine was supposed to be the idea of computer. So, for example, today there is Gualtiero Piccinini. I don't know if you are familiar, but we have mentioned his work. He is in physical computing, and he makes, together with Oron Shagrir, a very strong claim that neurons are computational systems, and that the neural networks are in our brains are performing computations. But those are very special computers. Do you have any comments on that?
Sorry for chipping in. There is actually, what is his name? Michael Conrad, right? He was arguing that already at the synapse level, you have a computation.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Because you have a complicated regulation of enzymes already at the synapse level, and then goes through neurons. And
yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, now maybe you can hear me. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. You see, this mistake of mine, I was talking without putting on my. This is a computation. Since let me say in this way, classical, let's call for convenience, classical computers, the one we have today, they really are organized on a binary switch, on, off, 0, 1. And you have such kind, and this means that you can use digits to describe something. So you can do really some operation. And you can construct electronic circuits such that you can do addition, subtraction. I mean, objects like this one. This is a computing machine. But at some moment, Feynman, who has been a physicist, a great physicist, he went out considering that to do computations in this way, you need a lot of time if you have to do many computations and complicated ones. Just because what von Neumann was saying, we ask exact, exquisite precision, he was saying. And we want to follow step by step if everything is going in some way, the way we want. This is because it's a classical system, on-off. Now, Feynman, he was saying, well, but in quantum mechanics, we have also superposition of states. So if we can use quantum superposition and build up a machine that can use a quantum dynamics, so based on superposition, we might have a much faster, computation, shorter computation time, because at the same time, you have many paths. You start with one path, but you can start also with another path. Quantum mechanics is, you cannot follow each path in between input and output, but you have many paths. So this is something, it's very rough what I'm saying, but it's something having many, infinitely many parallel computing machines, because along each path, the computation goes on. And this is in between you cannot observe, because otherwise you break the superposition. But at that point, from one side, this is developed research well alive today and very important on quantum computing. But on the other side, you realize that any system, a piece of matter, this object, which has some temperature because it's room temperature at this moment, if I look at this quantum composition, this is, there are polymers, so there are a chain of molecules and then, things like that. This is not because it's a computer. Let me say, this mouse. Okay, these are computing. So any system evolving in time according to a certain quantum dynamics is computing something. It's computing the state where it goes. You see, it is very general. So what is a computer? Anything where you can put, and this was the original definition of a very original computer machine. You put an input and you get an output. Now the point is if you can see what happens in between, or you just wait for the output. But this is also system theory, because after all, a system point of view, you give an input, the system does something, is a black box, and you look at what is outside. So the word computing is quite general. but is always related with a stream of necessary steps. Given A must follow B. So there is always something which is cause and effect. This is the main idea of a computation. Something which is derived, the possibility to derive something from something given, an input. Now, there is a problem because now, I mean, this was already known. This was the main critics of EPR paradox, Einstein, Podolsky, Rosen. We know also that at the quantum level, you have entanglement. And namely, entanglement means that you have two players in our orchestra. They play because they are in phase. There is, I mean, the violinist is not the cause of the way the one with the trumpet is playing his trumpet. They are not related by a cause. There is no force in between. This creates, from one side, a big problem to this idea of a computation, because we have something which is not related in a chain of cause and effect, because there is no force in between. And then it can go also above speed of light, which is would be in the presence of a messenger, a violation of relativity, which is not admissible. So players in phase, they play simultaneously. They do not send a message among themselves. They are tuned on their own music. So this is self-computing in some sense. You see, now, one difficulty that there is in considering computers is that we always are bound by connections. We want that I have a transistor and another one. I need a connection. I need something which is connecting, a wire. And this is the limitation, because when we think in terms of wire, is because I want to send along that wire some messenger. And this is very, how to say, is a very primitive idea, because I do not need a messenger among players in an orchestra. So the concept of a computation goes much beyond this idea of having something wired. Neuroscience today still thinks of neurons, going back to neurons, and of synapses, in terms of wired systems, wired neurons. There are anatomical wires which you can observe in laboratory, dendrites, axons, synapses, all of that. But all those parts is really the less important part. The most important part is in-phase oscillations among neurons. Among neurons. The voice, no, you are out of your...
Sorry, I wanted to ask, are you thinking in terms of some field that is synchronizing the behavior of all the oscillators?
Exactly.
But we have, you know, when they talk about neurons as computing units, they are also thinking about chemical level. So
yeah, thank you for that. So at the chemical level is the last part of the story. What Walter Freeman he was observing, but not only him, I mean, many neuroscientists, they observe in laboratory that the way the brain reacts in very far apart regions, and it always reacts all of it. There are regions specialized, let me use this word, which is not the good one, but in any case, for the talking, for seeing, but every time there is an input, the whole brain is a scene that reacts. And the speed is such that it cannot be this excitation in one part of the brain and the other one cannot be, there cannot be any chemical responsible because it would be too slow. And it's not a radio wave because it will be too long waves. And there is not magnetic, is not observed any magnetic field in between. The only remaining part is such entanglement which comes from quantum physics. So practically, Professor Magnani said this practical philosophy is always crucial. In physics, you need matter. In chemistry, in biology, let's say, because now we are talking of brain, people forget that all of it is embedded in water. If you take out water, you do not have any biology. So, because it's impossible, I mean, macromolecules, proteins, DNA, they do not work without water. A student of first year of biology, he learns that he can never take out old water out of a chain of protein or DNA. So there is water. Now, water, what is? Water is a beautiful collection of dipoles, electrical dipoles, because electrons, the hydrogen electrons, they like to spend their life near the oxygen, and then you get a dipole, an electrical dipole. Now, a dipole can vibrate, can be oriented. That is the symmetry I was talking. So you break the rotational symmetry of dipoles, and they get oriented or play in phase, oscillate in phase. This bat of oscillating in phase water dipoles acts as guiding in phase neural activity. So you see, neurons, they get in phase because of the water they are embedded in.
But Professor Vitiello, I have to ask you one thing.
Yeah.
This quantum idea, it must have been challenged, right?
Excuse me?
It must have been challenged, this idea that the quantum effects and coherence actually are governing behavior in brain. It must have been challenged. Because it is hard to imagine that this coherence would actually survive in an environment like that. I mean, you know, I'm actually a quantum chemist. You know, also, I have a PhD in quantum chemistry. So, you know, we don't have aromatic molecules in our brain.
No, you do not need, because everywhere you have in the brain, more than 90% is water. Now, water dipoles, molecular dipoles of water, they are quantum objects. Since the spontaneous breakdown of a symmetry creates orchestra of dipoles, then, and this is quantum, then you have a coherent structure. As I did show you in a slide.
Yeah, I've heard of it. There is something that is called structured water, right?
You can call it many ways, but
the range,
now it's clear.
The correlation length, I don't know, it's probably not that big, yeah?
The correlation length is enough, long enough to include neurons, assemblies of neurons. You see, you can show that in very simple computations, numbers, because physicists use numbers. They compute, by the way. Yes. Okay. Yes. You can show that that system is quantum. But what happens, the coherence is central. Coherence is, you see, when you were a kid, maybe even now, I still play with little magnets. You see, they are still there. My magnets, I'm quite old now, but the magnets I was playing when I was 5 years old, they are still active. They are a very long lifetime. So they are classical objects. The needle of a compass is useful because it's a classical.
But you see, my problem is with scales, because, you know, dipole is order of angstrom, right? And the neuron can be almost macroscopic, right?
Yeah, but they are much larger. You see, in the model, in the quantum dissipative model,
you're basically suggesting that the correlation length in structured water is macroscopic. Is that true?
It is true.
Okay, I didn't know that.
It is true. And the quantum objects are not the neurons or the glia cells. They are too complex and too big to be quantum. They are classical objects. This is just, if you have a compass.
But the water around is actually...
The water is quantum, and it creates a compass. The needle is magnetized, but is a classical object. You can, with your hands, you take it, and it moves. It moves in the magnetic field of the, but the microscopic structure of the needle of a compass is a quantum structure. This is the way we describe magnets in physics. The coherence makes the transition from microscopic to macroscopic. The needles might be even centimeters. I mean, in a big compass, you have big needles. So this is the point. Coherence. Coherence is the key word. Coherence, maybe I could recover, maybe then it will be too late. If I recover the slides, I had somewhere, maybe, yes, they are. And then I share the screen. Let me go back to, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah. You see, this one was, you see, this is a coherent alpha is usually the name you call it, but you can call beta or John, whatever you like. Alpha is a coherent state because you see, is a superposition, is a quantum coherent state, is a superposition of many, infinitely many. Here, the infinitely many is crucial. It must be infinitely many. You have a box with 0 particle inside. This is a state with 0 particle. You call it the vacuum, usually. Then you have a state with 1 particle, with 2, 3, n, infinity. Okay? You can write indeed as a summation on n from 0 to infinity. N is an integer. So n is the number of particles in a given state with n particles of this kind. Now, the beautifulness of this structure is the coefficient. You see, this is alpha square over root of 2 factorial. Here is alpha, here is 1. Then you have powers. So alpha to the n over n factorial. This is just... Now, if you destroy 1 particle in alpha, which is the summation, this state will disappear because you destroy it. There are no particles, so this will disappear. But 1 will become the 0 state. And the 2 particles will become 1 state. So the whole superposition reconstructs itself. This is a self-similarity. How this is possible? Because there are infinitely many of them. This is like having a big necklace with many, many pearls. So many that you can take out 1, but there are infinitely many. So it's still a good necklace. Okay? So it's the ideal necklace for somebody that steals pearls, because nobody will realize that 1 pearl has been. So this state reproduces itself. This is called the Glauber state, because it's the state representing a laser beam. If these alpha are photons, these are a laser beam. This is a laser state. And one peculiarity of this is that all these particles, they have the same phase, this alpha modulo square. So all the particles, this is a big orchestra. They play with the same phase. They are in phase many particle states. You see, and this means that you have in this relation, you see where I'm pointing with mouse? This delta n proportional to a constant over delta phi. Delta phi is the uncertainty on the phase. If you have uncertainty very small, delta n is very large. But when delta n, which is a fluctuation, can be very large, when n is very large, only in that case you can have a large fluctuation. So in a laser beam, more is focused, more coherent is the beam, larger is the uncertainty on the number of photons it carries. You see, in a laser beam, if it is a good laser, you do not know how many photons are there, because there are so many, and the uncertainty is such that you cannot give any number.
Because they are not individuals, right? They are groups.
Yes, yes. You see, they are not individual because they are like players in an orchestra. But you see, a coherence preserves individuality, because the violinist remains a violinist. Yet the individuality is the number in each state. You see, coherence is a beautiful concept. Is from a sociology point of view, is very interesting because it is a collective mode where individuality is preserved.
What is extremely exciting is that actually you seem to be suggesting that this exists in water, yes?
This is those exist. People is observing now.
Fascinating. I didn't know. This is, thank you. Thank you.
Now, if you just go on Google or something like that, you find a lot of papers in scientific journals, I mean, where now water is considered like a two-component liquid. One part of water is coherent. You have coherent domains, and another part is non-coherent. And this coherence, non-coherence is dynamical. So some molecule gets in a coherent domain, or someone is lost by a coherence domain. So water, for its chemical properties, is very concrete problem, has such a beautiful flexibility, plasticity. This is why life is made by water. This is why life is made by water. Water is beautiful and is the orchestra. The music played by the water makes the other objects floating in water dancing. So neurons, they have their activity because there is such a quantum environment, which is a coherent environment, and makes them joined together in some, they call neuron assembly. There are myriads neurons, there are a lot, of course, there are 10 to 11 as a number. But what is most important is that in phase. You see, there is, let me show you one thing which is, if I can, please stop me when I have to stop, no problem. You see, all of this you can describe with this. Let me take, I had another one where is better. This one is the same formula, but is more neat. Question 10. You see, this is, no, but I need also the other one, sorry. Okay, so let me go back. Okay, you have a quantity, which is very important for chemists. For the physicists, they are too sloppy, in my opinion, but it's crucial also, and especially in physics. Free energy. Free energy is the difference, F, let's say, of U, which is the energy of the system as a system, made by molecules, whatever you want. And then minus a term, which is the entropy times temperature. This beta is 1 over temperature, okay? Now here there is a minus. Now it is a law of nature that variations of entropy at each stage of a system, even in non-equilibrium, you can focus just one photogram of the movie, the variation of the free energy must be 0. This means that variation of the internal energy U is called internal energy, must be equal, because there is a minus here, you see? So du must be equal to ds, the variation of the entropy, time temperature, okay? This is at the fixed temperature. But look what happens when you have a coherent state. The variation, first of all, let me say, entropy is a measure of the ordering of the system. So if you have a variation of the entropy, you have a variation of the correlations of the ordering. If entropy increases, the orchestra is going away, is disassembling. If entropy is smaller, then the orchestra is playing just like an orchestra. Ordering is higher. So you have a continuous, there is a flux of energy going from the system energy, the individual energy, to such ordering. So ordering by itself corresponds to energy. This is energy. Or vice versa. If you lose ordering, this gives more energy. You are thermalizing the system. Put the cat in the oven. Poor cat. It is thermalized and you get, I mean, it will die. So because of this minus, so these variations are variations, this n sub k variation in time, which is in red here, is the number of correlations which are going away or coming in, depending if you are giving from year to year or vice versa. You see? So this is just a result of a computation. So you see that that an ordered system has an energy which is the order. Energy is no more connected with the matter, with the ball, with the little ball, with an atom. There is energy also in the correlation, which is the music. The players of our...
Aren't you assuming a closed system, because this df should be equal to d work, right?
Excuse me, first part?
Zoran, colleague, sorry. I mean, this df should be equal to the work that you can get from the system. And
of course, because
you're assuming a closed system in a way that is not interacting or doing work.
Yes, but this work is better to say in this case. If the volume of the system is the same, you can assume that it's the same, then it's not mechanical work. But the TDS, that is heat. It's the definition of heat. Indeed, the system is thermalizing or not. Okay, you can describe it. It is just thermodynamics. So you have such a beautiful continuous flux of many particles, the atomist point of view, getting ordered, they acquire, and this becomes energy. Ordering is energy. And from free, I'm not saying anything new.
So you're basically saying that you know, the activity, the brain activity, these coherent states that you believe they are there, they can go into environment, and then you can borrow them later on, right?
This is what we have when we interact with the environment.
Wow.
This is the word dissipative. Dissipative means that you are dissipating the richness of your family. This is a negative aspect. But dissipation is used in physics, also getting energy. So dissipating means fluxes of energy ingoing or outgoing from the system and the environment.
Goes both ways, yeah?
Yeah, both ways. Now, Fabrizio Desideri, who is a philosopher colleague in Florence, studies aesthetics, philosophy in aesthetics. He proposed that the aesthetical experience is reaching harmony with the environment. So the dimension of the brain is an aesthetical dimension. This includes art expression, of course, but is not limited to artistic expression. Is happiness. That is an aesthetical happiness, means to balance this flux, to have the possibility to order to put such correlations, to create correlations. You see, this is the,
okay.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
No, okay, it's okay. Now you can go. Okay.
And now there is, yeah, there are so many beautiful
5
things.
minutes, okay, 5 minutes, and
okay. There are so many beautiful things.
Okay.
For example, when I told you, when you go.
Sorry, can we ask Michael some questions about his
Sure,
talk,
please, go on. I stop. Please.
Yeah. Sorry, you know, it's. I'd like to ask Michael some questions about his talk if he's here still.
Excuse me?
Michael is not here.
Maybe he's gone off to make a cup of coffee in the break.
Maybe, yes.
Okay.
Okay, we continue the last 5 minutes of Professor Vitiello, and then I hope Michael comes again.
Okay, you see, before I was telling you that this is very interesting relation, this number 9, but also this one where time is 0 here. But here you have 2 different time, t and t prime, and each of these states has not component on the other one. So at each moment of this describe, this is a memory state, so it's a state of our brain. At each instant of time, the brain is in a different dynamic regime, a different of t, a different state. And this is called technically a phase transition. So the brain goes through phase transitions. If you make a picture of this, each point here is a state of the brain. This is just to illustrate very schematically. You can go from one point to another one. So this is a time evolution in the brain. Now you can show, and Freeman observed the role of chaotic dynamics, deterministic chaotic dynamics in the brain. If you look at these trajectories, a very slight change in the initial condition or in the boundary conditions, you get diverging trajectory. So the brain activity is a chaotic activity. But this is the meaning of making mistakes. Because chaoticity means that thinking comes going through chaotic paths. You just need a very small input or a very small change in your blood pressure or whatever you want, the light that comes from outside. Your mind change a path. So with Walter Freeman, we were also saying that maybe the root of the thought is wandering, which is just the opposite of any rationalistic approach to think or to brain activity in the sense of rationality. By doing mistakes, we learn, by the way. I mean, I do not want to make it too much because, but coherence is a guarantee that this quantum level manifests as a macroscopic level. Just like the magnetic property, the magnetization of any magnet, of a compass needles. I say compass needles because it's very useful, the compass, is a macroscopic object, but is a macroscopic quantum system, because you cannot explain magnetization without going to the quantum properties. And we think that brain is a macroscopic quantum system, which is a classical system, whose property you cannot explain if you do not know, if you do not go to such a quantum microscopic dynamics. But I stop here.
Okay, thank you for the discussion. Okay. I think that these discussions are always useful. I would like to have more time. So I plan with Robert to give a brief introduction about our topic. I'm not sharing my paper because now is too long, but I give in 5 minutes the word directly to Robert because what I was looking for is the a notion that I derive mostly from philosophy, but is an interdisciplinary notion like habit. Because there is this big discussion in collective intentionality about the relationship between intentionality and we intentionality. So when we do something together, what happens? We must consider the role of the individual mind, or there is something more than to consider, like a starting point from some collective mind or collective consciousness, something like this. I think that a good notion, in my opinion, would be to consider habitual behavior. Habitual behavior is a very intriguing notion because it implies memory, so it can be applied also in neuroscience, and obviously it's very large. And has also a biological basis, very, very important. So I like this notion of habitual behavior, because it is relating with our relationship with natural and social environment. But because I'm most interested in social ontology, how we, in some sense, constitute our practices, institutions, and so on. So I think how can we conceive a collective construction starting from habitual behavior? And so my research starts from the notion of habit, which is now highly discussed in philosophy, but always with transdisciplinary glance. That means to see the level of habitual behavior that is not only dead routine, like Ricoeur says, but we have habit routine and habit as learning. And so I took some ideas from Anne Greibiel. She's a very important neuroscientist, but you have my paper in the proceedings to see all the references. And she studies the goal-directed behavior already at that level, okay? Not to escape from pure associationist view. This Aristotle teaches us how to intend habit, these two levels, routine and goal-directed behavior. You know that there are a lot of study, Castelfranchi, for example, and Pezzullo and Castelfranchi were studying this way of habitual behavior, also in a social context like goal-directed behavior. Then I think that with this two-dimensional habitual behavior, routine and goal-directed behavior, we can apply easily to collective intentionality, because in collective intentionality we are like in rituals, as Michael, when we perform ritual to institutionalize or not. Obviously, if we go together, we decide to go to take a coffee at a certain time in a certain day. This is a shared habit, is not a ritual, institutionalized ritual. But in this case, we have always the modality of X. We perform as routine, and we must cooperate at the same time, so to construct a new situation. So I'm studying these two parts, and a very nice paper I found I want to address also to Gianfranco. Is a paper of Cohen, Levington, and Warglien, 2014, in Industrial and Corporate Change. This is the review, volume 23, number 2, where the author study starting from Greibel, Aristotle, the same background, the notion of collective performance, modeling the interaction of habit-based action. They have an introducing part and also a formalized part. And they think, I only read this small piece and then I give the word to Robert. Formalizations consistent with the psychological processes of actors whose actions are determined in large part by learned habits and association rather than by deliberating over the likely consequences of exogenously defined alternatives. They are against this formalization of rational choice theory, mathematization. They have a category similar of your, but maybe another context. For as long as long been recognized, it is these habit-based processes that give routines, institutionalized practices, or organizational customs their distinctive common qualities, and it quotes Aristotle, James, Dewey, Giddens, Bourdieu. So because they are studying how this process is also for industry, how the industry renew a new item for a car or whatever, starting from X and action. Action is the basis. I'm sorry, Zoran, because I'm running. So, but I have the paper, my paper in the proceedings. But this is nice because action is habit. You start from an action, you have acts. The acts, you can choose what acts fits with the situation. If you want to build a car, you cannot launch something. There are fixed acts you can do, you can renew acts. Then together decide the action. Action is like a function on the acts. And when you want to renew, you start from action and rebuild from action new acts to build a new car with new qualities, for example. So this, I think, it's very, very nice. In that, Cohen, Levinthal, and Wardy, and because we start from the same notion of habit, starting from Aristotle, but to see how the concept works, I give the word to Robert, who think he can share some slides with you. Thank you. And I'm here for questions or on my paper. I also have a short letter on academia where I started a discussion of the topic. So we can go on academia. on this topic. It's in the later session. Okay. So Robert, are you here?
Yeah, I made it eventually.
Ciao.
Yeah, after some confusion. I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. That's visible, I'm assuming. I'll put it into this format. Yeah. Can we all see this?
Yes.
Yeah. Except I want to do it. I don't like using Zoom, to be honest. I have to, so I can see more. Okay, so yeah, I apologize for not being present in the symposium, but I haven't really had time. It's a bit of a chaotic period, and I have 2 kids at home most of the time. So one of them is constantly getting small viruses at school, and so she has to stay at home because of the pandemic and so on. And the other one's only 6 months old. Okay, but I'll not go on too much about that. So the title of this presentation then is Vicarious Value Learning in Social and Pavlovian Scenarios. It relates to the presentation I gave that some of you will have seen already at World Logic Day a few months ago, but is somewhat different. Very briefly, this is myself pre-pandemic with a slightly neater hairstyle. My background is in psychology, computer science, and I'm interested in artificial intelligence and above all behavioral psychology and applications thereof. So the presentation here, I'll break down into 3 parts. So it's necessary to provide some background, and that entails description of the so-called differential outcomes training procedure and how it's been studied. And this has been used above all for demonstrating improved learning and memory. I'll then go into the notion of vicarious value learning through presentation of social Pavlovian learning, which is also using differential outcomes training procedure. And finally, and more briefly, I'll discuss a bit work in progress concerning gamification of differential outcomes training for the purpose of digital behavioral treatment, potentially targeting early stage dementia patients. Okay. So firstly, the background concerning differential outcomes training is that it's based on a lab-based experimental approach. So fundamentally, instrumental conditioning, which I guess we understand as being related to sort of Skinner box, where you could have a rat having to, or a human in it, but not in a Skinner box, naturally in a more computerized, maybe carrying out a computerized task where there is a sequence of presentations of, let's call them events. So firstly, a stimulus that would be presented. In the case of a rat, that might be in the form of a sound or some kind of signal like a light. With a short delay, response options are presented or enabled, which might be a lever, which the rat is then required to press in order to then obtain some kind of outcome, which could be food reward or the avoidance of an electric shock. Okay, so 3 elements: stimulus, response, outcome. And another example then here would be in a computerized task for humans. So imagine that this is something which is presented here on a computer monitor, a simple stimulus, which is like a flower, followed by a short delay, followed by 2 possible response options, insofar as the human participant can point to one of these 2 or click on the mouse that concerns option 1 or 2. By trial and error, the human participant then has to learn to associate one of these 2 options with the stimulus, the correct stimulus, in order to obtain some kind of outcome which may be rewarding, or it may be sort of some kind of sensory stimulus which is not primarily rewarding. So to depict it in another way, you have the stimulus, you'd have a delay, choice options, incorrect choice, no outcome, correct choice, feedback, so verbal praise, okay, in this particular example. And that would represent one trial in the experimental setting. Another trial could be then with a different stimulus, which requires a different response in order to obtain different outcome. Okay, so in this case, food is presented. The same outcome then is consistently paired with the stimulus response pairing. So this response is required, this stimulus will always result in this outcome, as opposed to this outcome. Okay. So this is a differential outcomes form of training as compared to non-differential outcomes training, where the outcomes are irrespective of the correct response stimulus pairing. It could be either verbal praise or food arbitrarily. Alternatively, you could always have verbal praise for every stimulus response pairing, or always have food for every stimulus response pairing. Okay. All right, so that was in a nutshell. It can be made more complex, and so you can have more stimuli, response pairings to learn. You can have more different outcomes to learn. And the particular outcomes can be different types of rewards. They can be different probabilities of rewards. There can be different types of sensory feedback as well. There are 2 points I want to then make here. Firstly, this approach is interesting because it's flexible, and this has implications, which I'm going to come to at the end of the presentation. So the stimuli responses and the different outcomes can be whatever you want. You can choose different types for these. But the real take-home message, the important point, is that people learn more quickly when trained using differential outcomes than by non-differential outcomes. So they learn to pair stimuli and responses more quickly, the correct stimuli responses, or the correct responses to the stimuli, when they're being trained by differential rather than non-differential outcomes. Let me just see what there was a chat point here. All right, that's for something else. All right, we'll continue. Okay, so this finding that you get this so-called differential outcomes effect, which is that people learn more quickly through differential outcomes training, has been found, and it's been found to be robust over about 50 years worth of experimentation, according to this particular meta-analysis that was recently made by McCormack. And has also been theoretically explained in terms of the existence of two memory processes, okay, which I'll explain shortly. Several universities are carrying out this research currently. It's been applied to animals, so trained with animals, also infant humans, adult humans, but also in clinical subjects, where an interesting finding is, I'm not going to explain the details of this, except that the white bars represent differential outcomes training performance in terms of correct responses, and the black bars represent non-differential outcomes performance. So you see in general, you get an improved performance with differential outcomes training for human controls, mild cognitively impaired subjects, and also Alzheimer's disease subjects. And what tends to be the case, which is also shown here, is that the differential outcomes effect is more pronounced, is stronger in clinical subjects. So in this case, the Alzheimer's disease group have a much more pronounced improved performance with respect to differential outcomes training than is the case for healthy controls. This is something which has been found across a number of different clinical studies as evaluated by McCormack. All right, so that was the background. Now I'm going to just describe what I mean by social Pavlovian learning. Okay. So the differential outcomes training procedure is most standardly studied with just one stage of learning, which is that which I just described, where you have stimulus response outcomes such as this. So stimulus 1 is presented and R1 is correct. That leads to outcome 1, verbal praise. Or stimulus 2 is presented on another trial. Response 2 is the correct option, which leads to outcome 2. But there are other forms of differential outcomes training, so where there are 2 stages of learning. Okay, and through this, it's possible to demonstrate that participants can make correct responses even without directly learning stimulus response pairing. So they can choose the correct response even though that hasn't been previously presented with respect to a particular stimulus. And this is, the above point is then theorized and explained by the so-called associative two-process theory, which alludes to the existence of 2 memory routes or processes. So you have this sort of more direct or retrospective memory route between stimulus and response, maybe call it habitual, where the person or the subject keeps in mind the particular stimulus in working memory over a short delay for a couple of seconds or so before then choosing one of the response options. But the alternative memory route is then an outcome expectancy route, where once a stimulus is presented, the person has in mind the representation, if you like, of the particular outcome. So if you're expecting to get food, you have a representation neurally of food. It's an expectation to get food, and that in turn can be associated with the correct response. So you're associating this expectation of the outcome both with the initial stimulus that's presented and with the response that yields the correct reinforcing outcome. Just going to check the chat again. Oops, 1 second. Yeah, that's a different thing again. Okay. So what this allows for is what I have termed associative inference, even associative transitive inference. So the idea is that stimulus 1 by association leads to the outcome, the expectation for outcome 1, E1, and that outcome expectation E1 leads to a representation or expectation for response 1. So S1 leads to E1, E1 leads to R1, and therefore S1 leads to R1 by, in this case, associative transitive inference. And similarly for the other pairing, S2 leads to E2, E2 leads to R2, therefore S2 leads to R2. And so through this transitive inference, it's possible to make correct responses through using this outcome expectancy route, even though stimuli response pairings haven't been made. So let's see an example of how that works. So if we have a stage 2 of learning, now we present new stimuli, stimuli 3, stimuli 4, but we use the same outcomes that were used in stage 1. So I can visualize how that might be. So this was stage 1, where we had these 2 stimuli. Let's call them stimulus 1, and then stimulus 2 would be the star. In this phase, we present 2 new stimuli, this sort of dog-like image, stimulus 3, and panda-like image, stimulus 4. This is now Pavlovian, which means that we don't have response options, but rather we simply observe the stimulus 3 or 4 being followed by the particular differential feedback, either verbal praise or food, as was used in stage 1. So we're required to learn these new associations between stimuli and the existing previously presented outcomes. And then we have a stage 3, which is really just a test test phase. At this point, we present again to the subject stimulus 3 or 4, so the novel stimuli. And we now re-present the response options from stage 1 that were hidden in stage 2. Note that, for example, stimulus 4 and response 2 or response 1 was never previously presented together in either stage 1 or stage 2. So there's no direct association that could have been learned previously. And yet, typically, the participants will choose response 2 here when presented with stimulus 4 without having to do any learning, so within the first trial or so. And again, why this is the case is that the participants are doing this associative transitive inference. So stimulus 4 should lead to expectation 2 from stage 2, so the expectation for outcome 2. And in stage 1, it was learnt that the expectation for outcome 2 is followed by response 2. So that association has been made. So these two associations have been made. So S4 leads to E2, E2 leads to R2, therefore S4 leads to R2, even though that hasn't been learned. And that's the correct response, which yields this outcome. Okay, so that's quite a handy sort of way to learn, you could say, or to be able to produce correct responses with new stimuli without having to undergo trials of learning. I considered that you could substitute this Pavlovian phase for what could be called a social Pavlovian phase, so observing from others. And Pavlovian learning has been previously coined as, in some cases, social Pavlovian learning, where then humans observe novel stimuli and outcomes for others. But if it's Pavlovian, they wouldn't be observing the responses of others for some particular reason. It might be hidden or not easily identifiable. I'm just checking the chat, which I think is still not related to my talk. That's okay. So the idea here is that the observer may be able to learn vicariously through representing the other's outcomes or expectations as if they were their own. So in 2 experiments actually that have been published in this particular paper, myself and colleagues investigated this. So in one scenario, you have the participant carrying out the stage 1 of learning, so that their own individual stimulus response learning. Then in stage 2, they observe the stimuli and novel stimuli and the outcomes of another, but not the responses. And then they're able to infer through this associative transitive inference the correct responses in a test phase. And that was demonstrated to occur both in this scenario and also in a more challenging scenario where the outcomes weren't presented, but rather the facial expressions of this confederate, this actress in this case, which were consistently differential, so either expressing positivity or relative frustration in relation to the monetary reward that was now no longer visible. Okay, I have a video for that, but I'm not sure we have enough time maybe to do that. I mean, I can just very briefly give you an indicator of how it works. That would be a stimulus. These are the response options. That's the outcome. Okay, that's one outcome. This is another stimulus. Response options. This is another outcome, so differential outcome. And in a setup with an actress, she either smiles, she's positive. Okay, she might be positive there again. There's another scenario where she's not so positive, maybe not this particular one. I have to see exactly where it is. Yeah, there she's a bit negative. So from that information where a stimulus is presented and the actress who has a video which is ongoing throughout the condition and is expressing positivity or mild frustration in relation to the outcome which isn't visible to the observer, it was still possible for us to find a statistically significant result with respect to this associative transitive inference, which is quite interesting. Okay, and so the explanation is that participants are forming representations of the expectations of the outcomes, but for the other, in relation to the stimulus that's presented to the other, whilst they also have their representations of their own expectation, which is the same expectation, which is vicariously represented as associated with the responses that they chose in the first stage. And so they can use these representations of other and self to form this kind of transitive bridge in order to choose the correct responses at the test stage. Okay, so briefly I wanted to discuss work in progress which concerns an application of this possible approach, which is to do with a so-called gamification of the differential outcomes training procedure for digital behavioral treatment. So I'm currently working or collaborating with this company called Brain Plus, which specializes in gamified cognitive memory training. In this collaboration, we're gamifying firstly standard differential outcomes training tasks, so using just a single learning stage, not doing the associative transitive inference. And the differential feedback then concerns social feedback in this case, rather than an explicit reward. So this guy is giving a thumbs up for the correct response regarding what he does, which was provided earlier in the trial as a stimulus. Another prototype we just started working on is more two-stage differential outcomes training that I just presented, which entails associative transitive inference. And in this case, we envisage this being a two-player game where stage one is carried out by player one. Stage two, the Pavlovian stage, is player two. So it's Pavlovian from the perspective of player one, but is instrumental from the perspective of player two. And so every trial we interleave. So we have player one has his turn or her turn, and then player two has his or her turn, and it's a turn-taking game. And that way they can potentially learn to do associative transitive inference within the game, which is a sort of spatial grid-based game, I can say. I don't want to say too much because it's still just an early prototype. We think this is promising in relation to memory training for patients with early stage dementia. So for two reasons. So firstly, early stage dementia, typically, at least for Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia, affect the hippocampus, also entorhinal cortex, which are important for learning to keep in memory retrospectively, for example, stimuli and events, and being able to make associations through that, so being able to convert into long-term memory, but also spatial cognition. And differential outcomes training experimentation over a number of different reported articles has demonstrated that the differential outcomes training procedure can improve learning and memory performance in dementia patients, both on visuospatial tasks and more episodic tasks. The idea being that the differential outcomes memory, or the differential outcomes training, is exploiting this outcome expectancy memory route so as to circumvent the memory route which is degraded in dementia patients. The second reason why we think it's promising is by virtue of another gamified memory task, which was for training people with, particularly children with ADHD, which was recently FDA approved. Interestingly, this is maybe the first gamified task which is a non-medical form of treatment which has been FDA approved. And the general process is to provide regular gaming sessions with the patients over a period of therapy over, say, several weeks. This then requires the initial task that you're trying to train the patients on to be entertaining or engaging enough that they're willing to, or motivated to comply to this form of therapy over the several weeks. That's the reason for the gamification, I should say. All right. Okay, so that wraps it up. I'm mean, I think this relates to the theme in terms of having a novel perspective on how outcomes might be used as representations in order to be able to learn in a more efficient way, and also through this notion of associative transitive inference. So I hope some of you can relate to this. I know it's a little bit of a niche topic, perhaps, in relation to this workshop, but are there any questions concerning the material?
Okay, we are open for questions.
Yeah, Susan, I think,
Yeah,
with a hand
right,
raised.
yeah, thanks. That was really interesting. Thanks. This training of patients, I couldn't quite work out whether you were training them on the sort of abstract examples and then expecting that to transfer to ordinary memory, or you were training them on real tasks that they needed to remember.
Right, that's a good question. We're applying for funding currently for an intervention-based training. So the idea is that we work with dementia patients to identify, and this is actually the point I didn't make that I said I'd come back to, but I'll come back to that. The flexibility of the pitch with the choice of stimuli, oops, gone too far, stimuli, responses and outcomes. So the idea is that dementia patients would discuss with us what are relevant stimuli, what a relevant response, what relevant outcomes to their daily life, so we can make this something they can learn that's going to be generalizable to some extent, hopefully, their daily routine. Yeah. Okay. Other questions? No.
Zoran's got his hand up.
Okay, Zoran.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I'm really happy because you're in Gothenburg, yes?
Yep.
I'm in Chalmers. So
Okay.
yes. So actually, I developed a machine learning algorithm that I wanted to, it was my ambition over the time to actually apply to social sciences and psychology. And I even tried, right, applying it to healing spinal cord injuries.
Okay.
So I wonder if you'd be interested in discussing it. Not
Yeah,
now,
sure.
but maybe later.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I have actually neurally computationally modeled this as well, but it might be interesting then to compare and to also observe your approach, and maybe you can get also good tips to how I've done to my particular approach.
It's a lot about, it's a lot about repeated interaction. It's a lot about understanding the system by providing inputs to it and then watching the response.
Okay.
Okay, but this is just applied. This is just applied to physical systems, devices.
Right.
Yes, yes. But I have ideas actually of how this might. But I'm curious whether it is feasible at all. So I need somebody from the field to tell me, yeah, maybe one should go for it, or no, this is not a good idea at all.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, we can. Would you like to email me? Maybe any sort of work that you've done, or a more detailed description of that work.
If you want, I can actually paste it in the chat if you want.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
In a second.
Yeah.
In the meantime, other question? Okay.
All right. Good. All right. I'm going to stop share because I can't find this otherwise. Okay.
For example, this idea with differential Pavlov experiment, it actually mirrors the ideas we had, because we wanted to provide auxiliary drive to the system that is achieving actually phase-space separation. So it makes system much more clear in its intentions.
Right.
So it's a very simple idea. It's a very simple idea.
Yeah, I'll peruse that, the article.
I know it might be abstract if you just read it without actually any dialogue with a human. So it will be good if we actually, but you know, you said you have small children, so I don't know how much time you actually have.
Yeah. Nights is the
Understand,
best.
I have 4 kids, so.
Right. I can't imagine, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's reservoir computing, so that could be interesting, yeah. So I've got that, and I'll just make a note of your email before that goes.
So it's in a way, it's indirect sensing algorithm, okay?
Right.
So you basically, you're having a dialogue with the system, and then in the same way you could actually have a dialogue with the person.
Okay. Right. I'll read through it to see if I can see the connections.
My ambition is not that you read through it. This is not what I'm trying to achieve. I'm just trying to achieve whether you glance at it and then you say, ah, this might be interesting, and then we talk, okay?
Okay.
Then we grab a phone and we talk about it, yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
all right, let's do that. Yeah, thanks.
That's a strategy, good strategy. Okay, I don't know if there are other questions in general. Unfortunately, Michael is abandoned the meeting. I wrote him an email. I hope he can be in touch with Susan or other people interested in his paper. And so I thank you, Rob, for your paper. So now you are working with children, not with neural networks.
With children in real life, I'm working with children. Yes.
No, all this work apply for not for machines.
Yeah, well, so I am working with I'm neural computationally modeling this at the same time. So it's a combination of empirical and modeling work. Yeah.
Okay, but it's important to know both. Obviously.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, yeah. Okay. I was going to say that the modeling work can also inform maybe intelligence systems. You could see it also in terms of artificial intelligence. I mean, I envisage the particular model I have of differential outcomes training in terms of a kind of new type of value, reinforcement learning based value learning. So.
No, very interesting. I know it's more technical than what I'm doing now, but it is like the technical basis in some sense, how it functions. So yes. Now, if there are no other questions, they break soon. So I want to thank all for the talks, the participation, the discussion, and I hope we can meet soon and physically, in presence. I think that in summer we will be okay with the vaccines and so on. So I hope to have the possibility to meet you at least in Japan, no, but for some meeting, future meeting. In Japan is online. Japan is online.
Grazie Gordana.
Grazie a
Raffaela.
tutti, grazie a tutti.
Grazie, arrivederci.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Ciao a tutti, a prestissimo.
Ciao.
Grazie.
A presto.